The camera flickered to life, and the channel's intro sequence began as B-rank hunter YouTuber Kong Duje warmly welcomed his subscribers to the Any Raid channel. This is where he usually flexed his epic dungeon runs. And today, he casually smiled, announcing that their target was a C+ rank arachnid. He then pointed at the cluster of spiders, explaining that arachnids always moved in unison like ant colonies and were categorized as arthropods. Duje dramatically shut his eyes for a moment, then declared these didn't look like earth spiders at all. Normally, they'd start by spitting webs, not charging straight into battle. That statement aged spectacularly badly, as a spider immediately charged at him. One nearly skewered him with its stinger. But Duje blocked it, shouting that their plan was totally ruined. He figured this footage would probably need a heavy edit later. The guy behind the camera, our main character, Moon Si-woo, who handled all the filming and editing, watched in utter shock. He thought there was no universe where arachnids should ever behave like this. Their fighting style revolved around trapping opponents with webs first, then injecting poison into a helpless target, not sprinting at prey like absolute lunatics. Duje grinned in irritation and surged forward, promising they'd have a little talk later. He then sliced an arachnid apart, followed by another and another, until he leaped into the air, cleanly bisecting the next one before landing on a pile of dead spiders. He wondered what on earth had gone wrong when Si-woo had specifically said they spit webs first. Si-woo's face was dripping with sweat as he realized arachnids would only rush prey if they were in such a desperate situation that survival no longer mattered. Duje suddenly grabbed Si-woo by the shirt and furiously demanded to know if he planned to keep pretending to be innocent. He then punched Si-woo in the stomach and yelled that an apology wouldn't fix a thing, because they had almost died due to his actions. Leaving Si-woo on the ground, he just walked away, claiming anyone without special traits, like Si-woo, was utterly useless. Those words hit Si-woo hard, and he narrowed his eyes vividly, recalling how he'd awakened an ability that possessed absolutely no special traits, making it utterly worthless for hunters. This forced him to survive by obsessively analyzing monsters and teaching hunters how to hit weak points properly. Dokyo closed his eyes and muttered that he had almost died because of this bastard. An entire squad would have died without his quick reactions. But the moment he finished speaking, the other members froze, pointing behind him, as a massive monster materialized right at his back. The creature lunged, yet Dokyo had already dodged. The entire squad broke into a terrified sprint, because the thing was a huge elite monster that outpaced them easily. While running due, Cheol dropped his sword and realized he needed bait to escape. He then glanced at Si-woo and decided Si-woo would be the bait, before kicking him in the face. As Si-woo screamed and shut his eyes, Dokyo turned and said that since Si-woo had provided wrong info, he should deal with the consequences. This left Si-woo on the ground, gritting his teeth, until his eyes widened in horror upon seeing the giant monster standing right in front of him. While his body refused to move, the monster roared, with its jaws wide open, and Si-woo's mind instantly drifted back to the hospital, where his mother lay in a bed, reaching toward him and telling him he had to protect his younger sister. That memory hit him so hard that he snapped back and realized he absolutely could not die here. He grabbed the sword with shaking hands and told himself he had to survive for his sister. As the monster drew close, and he swung the katana with everything he had, while yelling that he would survive no matter what. Suddenly, a violent explosion erupted and threw him backward. When he looked to the side, he saw a young blonde man in a red cloak, standing with a raging aura, while casually wiping sweat from his chin. Just as another ear-splitting explosion ripped through the air behind them, a blonde man cast a quick glance back, while a tattooed figure, radiating a menacing purple aura, bellowed that he'd hunt down his opponent no matter what. With a fierce leap, he lunged forward as a gray-haired fighter supercharged his fist with crackling energy, roaring for his opponent to stop running. The man cloaked in red swung, and the two titans clashed with such devastating force that Siwoo could only gape from the sidelines, utterly baffled. Who are these people, and why are they even fighting? Then another colossal explosion rocked everything to its core, and he instinctively shielded, his face desperately trying to process the chaos unfolding. As both combatants were violently thrown back, he stared at their expressions, and a chilling realization dawned. These were the true monsters, the kind capable of making even the most elite creatures tremble. He then watched them move with impossible, blurring speed, as the man in red launched another furious attack, sending powerful shock waves tearing across the battlefield with his repeated assault, causing even more shock waves to erupt. The villain, a picture of sick confidence, grinned widely, then brutally slammed the red-cloaked man into a massive rock, with a devastating blast that immediately set everything ablaze. The blonde man wiped a streak from his face again, stating grimly that they still had a very long way to go before any of this ended. He aimed his hand forward, beginning to charge a powerful attack, while the villain, mirroring him, charged his own. Both unleashed colossal blasts that rocketed towards each other, colliding and engulfing the entire area in an explosion of blinding energy, as the villain, screaming, yelled that neither of them would walk away from this unharmed. The blonde simply smiled, responding with a nonchalant, "I don't care." He then turned his gaze towards Siwoo, revealing he'd actually left this particular possibility open. This utterly bewildered Siwoo, especially as the man actually apologized for dragging him into this insane mess, while the villain sneered, scoffing loudly, that they were all going to die here. As the destructive energy kept building, another explosion erupted, then another, each one violently shaking the ground. The blonde, meanwhile, just smiled while the villain screamed in pure agony. Siwoo barely managed to keep himself standing upright as a massive shockwave almost slammed into him. Just then, the blonde man declared he would leave something behind for Siwoo, and a shimmering shield instantly materialized before him, appearing just in the nick of time to block the raging explosion. The cave was plunged into utter darkness, with only a faint, flickering fire providing any light. Siwoo stood there, miraculously untouched, trying to make sense of what the hell had just happened. He slowly lifted his head, utterly confused, then instinctively stepped back, feeling something under his shoe. Glancing down, he spotted a fully functioning smartphone lying on the ground, almost as if someone had just carelessly dropped it there. He picked it up bewildered, wondering why a random phone would even be in this cave. Just then, a notification pinged loudly, announcing the confirmation of a brand new manager. A connection check initiated on its own, and the system boldly declared that the manager position change was now officially complete. An unfamiliar, powerful aura suddenly wrapped around Siwoo, making his eyes sparkle with an intense, new light. The screen then shifted into a God Tube splash animation, greeting him like he was a fresh recruit, stepping into a massive job he didn't even know he had. Meanwhile, outside the cave, bright sunlight beat down on the exhausted crew, who sat on the ground, gasping for air. Dojo lowered his head, muttering to himself about how incredibly lucky he was to survive an elite monster in a measly C+ dungeon. His teammates quickly cheered him on, saying they only lived because of him, and even praised the brilliant idea of using Siwoo as bait, as if it were some master plan. This made Dojo grin proudly, confidently claiming he had absolutely planned for that outcome. That smug confidence, however, cracked instantly when his eyes shot wide open, as Siwoo suddenly materialized behind him, a fist already mid-swing and mere inches from smashing his face. Dojo, however, managed to block it with his elbow at the last second. He quickly slapped Siwoo back, harshly reminding him that he was only an F rank. Blood dripped from Siwoo's mouth as Dojo smirked, telling him he should be grateful he survived, because honestly, he didn't want the hassle of finding a new editor. Siwoo stared up at him, asking if Dojo seriously believed he would ever keep working for the guy who literally tried to kill him. But Dojo brutally jabbed him with an elbow again, arrogantly claiming Siwoo had been the one begging and crying to earn money for his sister's medical bills, claiming he helped him out of pure generosity. Thus, Siwoo was indebted to him. Siwoo swatted his hand away and snatched the camera, revealing he had the entire recording of Daju, abandoning him to perish, and that uploading it would explode with views. Daju closed his eyes, stating he could just end him right here. But Siwoo narrowed his eyes and reminded him that Daju would go straight to prison and lose his entire hard-earned channel. The instant he did that, the hunter's eyes went crimson with pure fury as he warned that if that video ever saw the light of day, Siwoo's sister wouldn't be safe with that venomous threat. He abruptly turned away and roared that he'd simply find a new editor. But Siwoo, with a frown, told him Daju had no idea what would happen if he even thought about touching his sister. Some time later, Siwoo sat alone in his room, studying the strange phone he'd picked up earlier. He browsed through the interface, wondering how a platform like this even existed, allowing anyone to upload anything they desired. He kept scrolling and realized that of all the channels available, the ones dominating the platform were hunter channels, where he saw knights battling Lucifer, Thor wrestling the world serpent, and even mythical gods showing up like regular content creators. He stared at the screen, trying to process whether these beings were actually controlling their channels, and he remembered the man in the red cloak, while wondering why that man had given him this phone in the first place. He set the device down for a moment because everything felt overwhelmingly confusing. Then he rested, his hand on his chin, imagining what it meant if gods were actually running channels, the same way influencers used YouTube. He cracked a small smile, thinking that gods probably started with at least 1 million followers just by existing. But he picked the phone back up, deciding it didn't look too bad, and maybe he should try messing around with it. He opened a channel belonging to a Chinese sage. The system suddenly prompted him to watch a lecture. Just by participating, he gained the S+ rank trait called Insight. Siwoo's eyebrows shot up in shock as another notification popped up saying he'd subscribed to Zhuge Liang, the legendary Chinese strategist from the Three Kingdoms era, and immediately the system declared he'd obtained S+ insight. A bead of cold sweat trickled down his cheek because S+ traits were considered merely theoretical classifications rather than real, and he remembered the 13 heroes who fought the Demon Lord, since people speculated those figures might have possessed S+ abilities. He stared down at his phone again, wondering if he'd actually gained that level of power just by hitting subscribe. Then he checked his hand, expecting some kind of instant change, yet felt absolutely nothing. He rubbed his chin again, assuming the trait probably enhanced observation and intelligence, making it hard to notice immediately. Then he spotted a channel run by Hercules, who was offering free personal training, showing how to uproot Zeus's entire house. And Siwoo promptly hit subscribe, thinking he might feel the difference afterward. The system instantly declared he'd obtained SS rank superhuman strength, and Siwoo accidentally smashed the table with just a light tap, destroying his laptop and leaving him speechless at the possibility of actually gaining an SS rank trait. He folded his arms in utter disbelief because he'd achieved an SS rank trait just by subscribing, and he clutched his head, yelling that he had absolutely no idea what was going on with GodTube at this point. The system suddenly informed him that his insight had increased slightly due to his constant thinking, reaching 0.1%, which made him glance at the phone, wondering if he needed to reach 100% to fully master the ability. He clicked on Hercules' training video and watched a massive crowd react as the hero ripped a stone pillar straight from the ground and squatted with it, yelling about how amazing everything felt as the earth around him cracked under the pressure. Hercules lifted the column overhead and roared with ridiculous strength, leaving Siwoo's jaw hanging open before he quickly pressed on subscribe. He said he now understood why Hercules had only one subscriber, and that he could never do something like that. The system refused his attempt to unsubscribe, and Hercules pointed directly at him, shouting he could come anytime he wanted, but leaving was impossible. This made Siwoo grin in disbelief, wondering why the hell he wasn't allowed to unfollow the guy. Suddenly, his phone rang and Dojo's name showed up, making Saiwa glare at the screen and question why that bastard was calling him after everything. That happened. Dojo sat on a chair, talking casually, and said he thought Saiwa had blocked him. Saiwa coldly told him to just say what he wanted, yet Dojo smirked and claimed he knew Saiwa had no other place to go. Saiwa held the phone to his ear while Dojo explained he had called about some business and told Saiwa not to act hostile because they had worked together for a long time. But Saiwa snapped back, telling him to hurry and stop wasting his time with useless small talk. Dojo leaned back, saying that the SH group wanted to stream together, and he was inviting Saiwa to join the project, which stunned Saiwa enough to imagine their skyscraper headquarters and recall that SH was Korea's #1 financial company, whose chairman's granddaughter had recently awakened hunter traits. Saiwa lowered his head silently and guessed they probably entered the monster hunting industry as well. Dojo said the company was expanding and wanted to try new things, and he asked again if Saiwa agreed, but Saiwa refused. Instantly, his eyes shot open when Darko suddenly said he would pay him 5,001 for the video. He then asked again if Saiwa wanted to join now, but Saiwa smirked with a sharp expression and refused a second time. A bead of sweat trickled down Dojo's cheek as he pointed out the offer was 10 times their usual rate, beneficial for both sides. He then asked Saiwa what amount he desired. Saiwa smiled slyly and named a price of 50 million, completely shocking Dojo into a furious outburst that Saiwa wasn't worth nearly that much. He wondered how Saiwa had figured out SH was paying him a massive sum. Saiwa just smiled again, thinking that his insight trait made it obvious why SH wanted to work with him instead of stronger hunters. This revelation scared Dojo enough to demand what he meant. Saiwa then explained that the chairman's granddaughter had recently awakened 2 S-rank traits, and the chairman wanted her to learn the basics. First, he then recalled how Dojo hunted monsters, stating that hunting was the ultimate foundation for all hunters. He then recalled the channel footage and explained their explosive growth past 200,000 subscribers happened purely because Saiwa had created unique strategies for monster fights. Saiwa tapped his head, declaring that Dojo received the chairman's offer, not because of his strength, but purely because of Saiwa's knowledge. And although Dojo frowned, insisting 50 million was still too much, Saiwa's eyes widened, and he asked if the guy really didn't want to pay. Dojo grinned nervously and started to stutter, but Saiwa tossed the phone onto the table, saying Dojo could try handling things alone, and that otherwise he would need to start looking for someone else. The next day, Saiwa and Dojo stood inside a B-rank dungeon, and Saiwa asked when the rest of the payment would finally be transferred, while Dojo stared at his phone and said he'd send everything once the raid ended. They both turned around as Han Charon, the granddaughter of SH chairman, approached and confidently announced she was ready to join their raid. This made Saiwa's eyes widen because she was unbelievably beautiful, and he quietly thought getting close to someone like her would be insanely difficult. The team then moved deeper into the dungeon, and Saiwa told himself he just needed to finish the job and secure his money. But they froze, stopping dead as a massive monster appeared. It had a purple aura looming right in front of them. Sharon stepped forward, instantly identifying it as a fearsome black troll, while Du Chiol chimed in, echoing the exact same information. Saiwa had once briefed him on how black trolls possessed near-immortal regeneration, and how inexperienced hunters could easily perish if they didn't grasp how to properly defeat them. He mentally visualized the troll's attack pattern and recounted the standard strategy everyone knew, which required tearing apart the black troll's entire body before destroying its heart, then decapitating it before regeneration kicked in. But before he even finished explaining, Sharon went straight for her sword, then sprinted forward without the slightest hesitation, leaping into the air with unwavering resolve in her eyes as she plunged her blade directly into the monster's heart before ripping it out and then immediately blowing off its head. She casually turned around, telling the stun guys that it was easy. Du Cheol cheerfully admitted he hadn't expected her to execute the technique so flawlessly, especially with minimal experience. He praised her like a stereotypical S-rank prodigy. Sharon flicked the blood off her blade, while Siwa noticed the weapon's peculiar black shine and inquired about its cost, since he'd heard rumors about that legendary sword named Aurelian. Sharon casually responded that it was around 20 billion. This left both guys with their mouths hanging open. She pointed toward the passage, telling them to continue, since they shouldn't end the raid with only one black troll. An hour later, they were still deep inside the dungeon, with blood pooling at Sharon's feet, as she casually mentioned. She was beginning to understand things better. She turned around, saying there were no trolls left, so they could end here, while Du Cheol bowed and praised her work, although inside he panicked, because he thought this would be his big chance to impress the Hunters Guild, but he had achieved absolutely nothing. He now believed Siwu had basically robbed him of 50,000. Siwa noticed Du Cheol sweating in a panic and smirked to himself. Yet that smirk vanished when a violent roar suddenly echoed through the dungeon as something massive rapidly approached. Sharon looked upward, trying to discern what caused it. Dokiel immediately tried to sound knowledgeable, claiming the creature's massive size meant it had to be an elite tier monster, but Siwu quickly realized this was no mere elite. A gigantic troll slammed down before them, its eyes glowing red, its teeth viciously sharp, revealing it was the dungeon boss. The monster then raised its massive fist to crush them. Sharon immediately prepared for combat, blocking the first devastating attack with her sword, while Dokiel froze, jaw agape, and the rest of the team fled in sheer panic. The monster smirked, watching them go, then violently hurled Sharon backward. She crashed hard to the ground before the beast launched a barrage of rocks toward the fleeing team, instantly injuring 2 members. Dokiel gasped for air as pure fear completely overwhelmed him, and he bolted forward, convinced he had to escape before he died. But a massive shadow swallowed him as the boss loomed directly overhead, and he whispered that he was already dead. Sharon saved him, blocking the attack, although the monster still struck the ground hard, enough to send her flying into a wall as it prepared a second attack. Sharon's eyes snapped open. She knew she had to dodge. She sprinted along the monster's arm, deftly dodging the swing, landing on its neck and delivering rapid strikes. But the boss whipped around, showing almost no damage, which left her stunned. The troll launched a lightning-fast punch, and Sharon jerked backward several times before finally jumping away. As dust exploded everywhere from the impact, she struggled to keep holding off the overwhelming force. Siwa looked up and realized they had no hope of winning. Even though Sharon held 2 S-rank traits, she was still an inexperienced rookie, facing a terrifying boss that had fought countless battles before. The troll laughed, unleashing a barrage of attacks, and Siwu watched from the side, thinking his only option might be abandoning Sharon and running, because if he stayed, he would die. He shook with fear, then remembered he had SS-level strength from GodTube. He wondered if he should test it, but before deciding, he saw Dojo sprint past him, terror etched on his face, while Siwu stared in disappointment and disbelief as the man ran for his life. Meanwhile, Sharon kept deflecting the troll's relentless blows with sheer willpower. A bead of sweat ran down Siwu's cheek as he realized they still couldn't win. Freezing in absolute terror, he thought he needed to escape or he would die. He dashed to the side, deciding to run, but the moment he turned back, his fear spiked so sharply that he screamed loudly, drawing the monster's attention directly toward him. He stared ahead with a tense expression, knowing money and fame meant nothing if he died here. The boss roared, swinging another massive fist, as Sharon barely held on with gritted teeth. Siwu clenched his fist and charged it with a bright blue aura as he ran forward, telling himself that if he ran now, he'd be no better than that coward. Du Cheol, his punch slammed into the monster's arm so hard it knocked the limb backward, enraging the boss, and leaving Sharon shocked because she had no idea how Siwoo managed to deflect the attack. She looked at his back, glowing with a blue aura, while a translucent warrior, outlined in blue, appeared behind him like a guardian spirit. Siwoo lowered his face, taking a deep breath as bright energy built up in his hand. The monster punched upward, breaking through the ceiling, then swung again with a heavy strike. But Siwoo blocked it with the SS strength he had gained. The impact exploded into a shockwave that rippled across the area while the monster snarled and bared its teeth. Siwoo held the block, while shouting that they needed to act now. Sharon heard him and shot upward into the air above the monster, swinging her sword with perfect timing. The monster opened its mouth in shock as she landed on its chest and drove her sword deep into it, before leaping upward again and performing precise, spinning movements in midair until she landed on its shoulder, then sprinted straight for its neck, slicing its head clean off with one perfect strike. She landed behind the monster just as its massive body began to topple. She and Siwoo stared at the monster's corpse. Siwoo finally felt a wave of relief, certain they'd defeated it, when a system window flashed up, announcing his insight had increased. But then, blood poured from the troll's neck, as Siwoo mused that boss monsters often had double transformations. This physical shift, he realized, was completely natural for a creature of its type. The monster's severed head began to regrow onto its neck, with sickening cracking noises. Then, in an unexpected moment, it snatched Sharon in its massive hand, and she screamed in pain, struggling to pull free as Siwoo watched, utterly helpless, thinking, if she dies here, I won't be able to save her at all. The monster's pupils tightened in shock. It clearly hadn't expected what happened next. As Siwoo pushed its massive fingers apart with all his might, Sharon twisted. In agony, one eye squeezed shut and yelled for him to run, while Siwoo kept holding on, shouting back that she needed to aim directly for the heart. She pushed against the giant fingers and finally slipped out of its grip, falling to the ground. She then lifted her head with a fierce expression, saying she understood everything, then grabbed her sword as she sprinted toward the monster with unwavering determination. Siwoo was still holding the monster's fingers apart, his eyes glowing, yelling for her to trust him and attack. The monster snapped its head toward the sound of her footsteps, tried to move its arm but failing, as it realized its hand wouldn't budge. When it looked to the side, it saw Siwoo still gripping its fingers tightly as he wrapped his entire hand around them and flashed a wide, confident smile straight into the monster's stunned gaze. The beast opened its mouth in a roar of rage, while Sharon charged forward with her sword, slicing the monsters. Her entire arm shot forward with unbelievable speed, leaving a blazing streak of blue light. As she rocketed upward, piercing one of its hearts, Siwoo watched stunned, his eyes practically popping out. As he bellowed, "The ogre has two hearts." Sharon gasped, completely unaware of that crucial detail, then expertly dodged the monster's brutal counterattack with a quick backdash, while Siwoo mentally mused that she'd likely figured out using her sheer instincts anyway. Her eyes gleamed like twin cosmic lights as she focused intently and lunged straight toward the monster, sword arcing for another strike. Again, lowering her katana with fierce resolve, her mouth set in a determined line, before driving a perfectly precise strike deep into its second heart. The monster erupted into a guttural pain scream. A powerful blue aura swirled around Siwoo's leg, and he sprinted forward, enveloped in that brilliant, glowing energy, swinging his mighty fist and roaring for the monster to finally stop resisting and just die. He leaped high toward the beast as Sharon dropped down at the exact same moment. And in its agonizing final moment, the monster saw the terrifying reflection of Siwoo's glowing fist in its dying eyes, before its massive skull exploded into shattered fragments. Blue lightning flashed brightly in Siwoo's triumphant eyes, his hand dripping with blood, and a trailing streak of vivid blue light burned behind him. He slowly stumbled a few steps before collapsing heavily to the ground, right there in front of Sharon. who stared down at him, wondering who he truly was. Just a moment later, Siwoo suddenly found himself blinking awake inside a completely different room, where a TV hung on the wall beside a clock and a cabinet. And as he carefully pushed himself up from the bunk, he immediately noticed a woman seated right in front of him. Karen was sitting right next to him. She had decided to visit him, and the sudden realization made his cheeks instantly heat up as he stared at her with wide eyes, utterly bewildered by her presence here. Karen then pointed toward the floor and explained that she'd brought him to the hospital because he had been seriously injured, despite his torn muscles and broken ribs. She leaned in, her legs crossed, asking how he felt. This only made him clench his fists in utter embarrassment because she was sitting way too close for his poor heart to handle. A bead of sweat crawled down his face as she edged even closer, and the room suddenly felt impossibly smaller, making everything even more awkward. She gently placed her hand on his forehead, which sent his embarrassment skyrocketing even further. And for a moment, the two simply gazed into each other's eyes, her hand still resting there, a sparkly curiosity shining brightly through her gaze. Tilting her head slightly, she noted he seemed to have a fever, while he instinctively scooted back and gave a shaky smile as imaginary steam practically poured from his burning head. She then asked for his name, since they'd never properly introduced themselves. With beet red cheeks, he wondered how she didn't know it already, since she must have seen his information. When he was brought into the hospital, Sharon looked away awkwardly, saying she'd wanted to hear it from him directly. Siwoo tilted his head forward in genuine surprise, because it truly felt like she'd somehow read his thoughts. He then realized her S-rank sixth sense probably allowed her to pick up on things without him saying a word. She turned to face him fully again and said he was probably still in a daze for just waking up, but she wanted to make him a proposal. Siwoo leaned closer, asking what kind of proposal she meant. With her hands resting neatly on her knees, she asked if he wanted to join her team. Siwoo stared back into her eyes, wondering if she only wanted him because he'd fought an ogre earlier. Then everything froze for a second as she casually mentioned offering him an annual salary of 1 billion. That made him snap upright, mouth wide open, and a hand raised in pure, utter shock, while she added that they would also split all monster loot equally. His grin faded when Sharon mentioned hearing about his younger sister suffering from a blood disease and said her team could cover the medical expenses so he wouldn't have to shoulder the burden, which cast a dark shadow across his expression. As he lowered his head without a word, he eventually lifted his gaze and asked what he had done to deserve something like this, and Sharon leaned in slightly as she explained with a confident look that she wanted him to create strategies for her, finishing with the fact that she needed someone who could plan out tactics for every monster she would face from now on. Night finally settled outside, and the ward fell into complete silence, while Siwoo lay on his pillow staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was stupid for refusing her offer at all. The memory replayed in his mind like a soft rewind, showing him sitting across from Sharon while explaining the reason for his refusal. And she had listened with calm surprise before telling him she understood perfectly. She added that if he ever changed his mind, he only needed to tell her because she still owed him for saving her life, and she planned to repay that debt by covering his sister's medical bills. But Siwoo kept thinking that before accepting any deal, he needed to test what GodTube could really do, since it belonged to gods who casually turned S-rank hunters into background characters without breaking a sweat. Turning his head toward the side, he looked at his little sister, sleeping with her eyes closed, and he knew he couldn't chain himself to a decision too fast when her future depended on something more unpredictable. She lay motionless on her back while he remembered the day she was caught in a sudden dungeon outbreak long ago, ending up with a rare blood disease modern medicine couldn't cure, only suppress. His mind filled with images of thick medical books, jars of rare ingredients, glowing blue crystals, and old monster skulls. displayed on red cloth, all of them expensive beyond a necessary belief. It's the only way to find a true cure. Opening his laptop, he muttered that he needed an insane amount of money for it. In the meantime, he still had to finish editing. Today's video. On the screen, Dojo stood frozen as Sharon battled the monster, and Siwoo's eyes widened once more. He recalled her casually mentioning her sword was worth 20 billion. He scratched his chin, thinking he could forge and sell equipment himself. He pictured a cinematic shot, him as a blacksmith, forging a blade of supernatural strength, earning billions in record time. But as he lifted his phone, he made a frustrated face. He only had one free subscription left, and if he wanted another, he'd have to pay 1 million won. He stared at the God 2 page, where Hephaestus held a massive hammer. Siwoo realized subscribing to the god of smithing was the only way to learn metallurgy and weapon crafting. He pressed the subscribe button with a dramatic tap and stared at his phone in shock. A system window appeared, telling him he had obtained SS class metallurgy. Inside Hephaestus's forge, piles of ingots and ore filled the background, and the god's hand slammed a blacksmith's hammer against Mjolnir, while shouting with blazing eyes that weapon upgrades required absolute courage and no fear of failure. Siwoo flinched as Hephaestus roared that people these days had zero guts and needed to accept that their weapons might break. Several system windows appeared, stating that his incorrect knowledge of metallurgy had been fixed and that his mastery of god-level metallurgy had increased. The next morning arrived, and the scene moved to a quiet street where a small playground stood under the early sunlight. Siwoo hung from a horizontal bar with one hand, before pulling himself up using only that single arm with steady strength. Two nurses, passing by, looked at each other in surprise and whispered about how much his body had improved, saying the doctor mentioned that Siwoo's recovery was unbelievably fast, even for a hunter, and that he could be discharged tomorrow. Siwoo looked away, pretending not to listen, though every word sank in. He reflected on how he was being discharged way sooner than he expected, since he'd assumed he'd need weeks of training before being allowed to leave. Sweat rolled down his face as system windows flickered in front of him, proclaiming his skills were improving. He visualized his muscle fibers stretching, thinking that reckless use of super strength would destroy his arms just like last time. So consistent training was the only way to prevent it. Suddenly, his younger sister appeared behind him and called out gently, leaning forward with her hands folded behind her back. She said she heard he'd be discharged the next day, which made him laugh awkwardly and admit it was true. She placed her hand over her chest and closed her eyes, explaining how worried she'd been when he first arrived at the hospital, because he looked like he was in critical condition. Then she opened her eyes, slightly with a sad expression, and glanced away, still looking aside. She awkwardly pointed out that doctors originally said he'd be hospitalized for months, yet he was somehow leaving after just a week. Siwoo smiled with his eyes closed, thinking she was simply upset that he was getting discharged. Before her, he stepped closer and placed his hand on her head, telling her not to slack on treatment, just because he wasn't around, and reassuring her she didn't need to worry about the medical expenses. For now, she nodded and mentioned that she already knew she was receiving free treatment thanks to Sharon Uni. Siwoo made a painfully awkward face as he heard Sharon's name, a weird expression blooming on him while his sister smiled brightly, saying Sharon asked her to call her Uni, since she had no younger siblings. Siwoo looked down and asked when that even happened, and whether his sister had ever met Sharon in the hospital before, scratching his head awkwardly as she explained that she'd visit them every now and then, even checking in on him during his training sessions. He blinked in surprise, crossing his arms as he'd never seen her there before. His sister then mentioned Sharon even asked about him, making the girl blush slightly as she hid a shy smile. Siwoo wondered why a busy hunter like Han Sharon would bother visiting him. He figured she probably wanted to recruit him, but his sister teased that Sharon likely came because she liked him, making him turn away with an awkward smile to deny it. She added that he was more popular than he thought because the nurses constantly chatted about him. He glanced away, embarrassed, telling her to stop saying pointless things and hurry back to the hospital because he had somewhere important to be. He clenched his fist with determination, lifted his head, and confidently declared that he was going to make some serious money. Sometime later, Siwoo stepped inside the dungeon, looking around with a tense breath. He figured the nervousness was kicking in because this was his first time hunting monsters completely alone. He clenched his hand into a fist and reminded himself to calm down. His gaze shifted to the side when he sensed movement, realizing the enemies were probably already here. A swarm of monsters suddenly appeared, throwing projectiles, forcing him to sprint away. He grinned slightly because he already knew these kinds of monsters acted in groups, yet he hadn't expected this many to show up at once. The goblins rushed toward him with weapons raised, and he dodged the first attack before launching his own punch, which instantly shattered one of them into pieces. He squinted, one-eyed in disbelief, because the monster had exploded way too easily, while the others froze in terror as he slowly approached with his head lowered and a sharp grin stretching across his face, telling them to hurry up and attack already. The scene shifted to a smithy filled with the bodies of monsters on the floor and Siwoo. He wondered just how much a master craftsman could truly forge from these materials. Then the blacksmith, standing before him, let out a frustrated roar, demanding what Siwoo possibly expected him to do. He'd asked for proper ingredients, not a measly pile of scraps. The blacksmith, C.O. Palwang, frowned deeply. He declared he'd at least teach him how to smelt, then ordered him to follow along. Swinging his hammer with practiced, powerful force, the master shouted that he needed to pay close attention, because a hammer wasn't just about raw strength. He thought back, recalling how he dedicated most of his youth to studying metallurgy. He struck the blade, explaining that even with high-grade materials, crafting A or S-rank equipment was never an easy feat. Siwoo stared with wide eyes as Palwang handed him the hammer, stating he'd demonstrated enough. Now was Siwoo's turn. Watching from behind with his arms crossed, Palwang remembered how Siwoo never asked him to forge equipment, never asked to become an apprentice, and didn't even try joining a guild in exchange for rent. Instead, he simply asked to borrow the workshop. The blacksmith had agreed, purely out of curiosity. Frowning slightly, the blacksmith realized he only needed one look at this young man holding a hammer to know exactly what kind of raw talent stood before him. As he watched Siwoo swing the tool, he thought about how modern people treated metallurgy like a simple game skill, even though it had taken him 20 long years to reach his current level. And worse, Siwoo kept checking his phone as if he'd watched enough videos to assume the craft would be easy, which made Palwang conclude that the kid was completely, utterly mistaken. Suddenly, the smithy door burst open as a girl entered with a bright, beaming smile, loudly announcing her arrival. The master, sitting on a chair, asked if it was sewn, and she confirmed it, joking that no one else from the village would willingly come to a forge that smelled this terrible. Palwang told her she could let someone else handle this errand, since she always had to come in person, but she just placed a hand on her hip. She revealed she came in person because he was the greatest blacksmith in all of Korea. The blacksmith chuckled, admitting she certainly knew how to filate brupe businessman. Soundus grinned, explaining she represented a company that exclusively handled top-tier products. Then, she reached into her backpack, announcing she had brought the requested ingredients he'd asked for. So now, they just needed to discuss the price. Paul Guang replied that the blade was already carefully wrapped in cloth, because its edge was incredibly sharp, and she needed to inspect it very carefully. Then, she looked up, excitedly mentioning a new delivery. She gushed that they were supplying equipment to the SH group this time, but the constant hammering noise was driving her absolutely crazy. She glared at Siwoo and shouted at him to be quiet, since they were trying to talk. Crossing her arms, she tried to figure out what he was even making. Picking up the blade, she joked, could this thing seriously be called a weapon? The blacksmith reacted immediately, asking What did she mean? So-un declared the blade was blunt, and its shape was dull, rendering it utterly unusable. Paul Guang's mouth fell open as he informed her that weapon was crafted from goblin and cobalt skeletons. Her eyes widened instantly as the blacksmith crossed his arms and explained that the raw material was in terrible condition, and the blade was forged by someone who'd held a hammer. For the very first time today, she asked if he had accepted an apprentice, and he frowned, admitting he had tried. The blacksmith then realized the kid was far too unbelievable for someone holding a hammer for the very first time. The memory of the tool in Siwa's hand flashed through his mind, along with the moment the young man struck the blade with unwavering confidence. Crossing his arms again, the master admitted he had never seen anyone forge a weapon out of such terrible material. Yet the same guy had refused the offer to become his apprentice. So-un immediately turned towards Siwa as he wiped sweat from his forehead, while she stared at him thoughtfully, trying to figure out exactly who this person was. After some time, he finally completed forging a sleek black spear. The moment he picked it up, several system notifications popped up, announcing that his god-level metallurgy skill had increased by 0.4%. He smiled with a rush of pride, because he had actually managed to create a real weapon. But then he immediately wondered how he was supposed to sell it now. So-un stepped up behind him and asked if he genuinely planned to sell that blade. She then held out her hand, introducing herself as Kim So-un, a representative of the So-un Company. Siwu looked toward her and realized he had already heard about her company. It specialized in the hunting business and highly valued trust and reliability, making her a well-known figure in the entire industry. So-un smirked as she explained that their company only dealt with the best products in Korea. So, if he intended to sell his equipment, they would buy it immediately. Siwu closed his eyes for a moment before asking how much they could offer. She replied that she could pay 1 million. One for a single weapon of that quality. He didn't waste a second and went straight back to hammering as if possessed, forging weapons nonstop. Meanwhile, So-un used that growing pile of equipment to finalize a successful contract with the SH Group. Back at the workshop, So-un beamed with excitement, exclaiming that the situation was absolutely magnificent. Before turning to Siwu, she announced that their company had officially signed a contract with SH Group. She pointed toward him and shouted that everything changed from the moment they met him, because the quality of his equipment was flawless, and without him, she would have ended up in serious trouble. She grabbed his hands and thanked him earnestly, saying that if he ever needed anything, he just had to say the word, and she would make it happen. She then pulled out her phone and told him to check his bank account. Siwu lifted his own phone to his face and froze when he saw the notification, showing an active balance of 280 million and won. Later that day, Siwu sat glued to his phone, his eyes wide with disbelief. He kept replaying the incredible number on his bank balance, recalculating it again and again just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. As he finally brought a trembling hand to his face, a realization dawned. He finally had enough to buy that coveted subscription to the legendary GodTube platform. Right after that thought hit him, a flurry of notifications flashed brilliantly across his screen, revealing 3 legendary channels. There was Hua-Tuo, the mythical healer, Hippocrates, the revered father of medicine, and Hyo-Jun, the undisputed master of traditional Eastern medicine. Siwu quickly realized that subscribing to all 3 would cost a staggering 300 million. One per month. In his current financial state, he could only choose one. He crossed his arms, deep in thought, his body practically trembling with tension. He covered his face, letting out a frustrated shout. Then, with a sudden burst of reckless courage, his finger slammed down on that subscribe button. The scene then shifted. Back to the workshop, where the blacksmith lifted both hands in resignation, declaring, "There's simply nothing more to be done. Fragile materials are notoriously difficult to polish, so I recommend keeping any polishing to an absolute minimum." Just then, Un walked in with a bright smile, greeting them. With her eyes closed in carefree joy, Paul Guang, bewildered, asked why she kept returning. She casually replied that she was there because of Mom. Siwu Siwoo looked at her, then blurted out he'd been waiting for her. This made her blush, utterly confused, as she asked him to repeat himself. Instead, he handed her a crumpled piece of paper and reminded her of her promise to get him anything he needed. The page contained a daunting list of supplies. She nodded, eyes scanning the daunting order, which included mountain frankincense, sulfium, saxifrage, 100-year-old ginseng, and several other incredibly expensive medicinal herbs. Still watching her intently, Siwoo asked, "Will getting all this be difficult?" She confidently answered that she could secure them, but warned the price will be hefty. His eyes went blank as she quoted the total, around 300 million won. Even with her offer of a 20 million won discount, Siwoo couldn't help but think how these rare items were absolutely essential for leveling up the divine medical mastery he had just gained. Even with his new membership, it was nearly impossible to acquire these materials on his own, since he didn't even know where to find them, or if they were sold anywhere at all. If someone hadn't been here, he would never have a shot at obtaining them. His attention then shifted back to her when she asked if he still wanted to buy everything, and he responded, practically in tears, saying yes as he rubbed his head. He remembered she'd paid him 284 million won earlier. But if he handed back 280 million, leaving him with a measly 4 million, and by the end of the month, that tiny balance would be utterly wiped out because the subscription cost alone was 100 million. He needed more money immediately. He needed hundreds of millions. Even selling equipment nonstop wouldn't be fast enough. His eyes widened as he suddenly remembered Dojo and the streaming business. Right then, Siwoo decided he would start streaming on YouTube himself. Sometime later, inside the subway, a guy was casually scrolling through his YouTube feed, already annoyed because nothing interesting was showing up until one thumbnail suddenly caught his eye. The channel name was Conqueror of the World. From the thumbnail itself, it was obvious something was off. The video was supposedly about strategy against hippos. Curious, the man clicked on the video. The scene opened near a small pond filled with water, and somewhere among the hippos, the video's creator was hiding in an extremely weird disguise. Siwoo took off his mask and calmly asked the viewers if they knew that hippos were not aquatic horses. The guy watching was absolutely stunned. He honestly couldn't process what he was seeing. He kept wondering what was wrong with this dude, and why the hell he dressed up like a hippopotamus in the first place. Siwoo then explained that the monsters shown in the video were called hippodons in Korea, while other countries referred to them as hippopotamus. As anyone could already tell, these monsters looked almost exactly like real hippos. He went on to explain that people usually use the Chinese character for horse when referring to hippos, even though hippos don't actually belong to the horse family at all. Hearing that the character for horse was used for hippopotamuses made our viewer pause for a second, genuinely pondering that information. Siwoo then explained that they actually belonged to the Bovidae family. To be precise, they're artiodactyls. He immediately added that if he went any deeper into the explanation, viewers would probably get a headache, so he'd stop right there. Next, Siwoo pulled out a red cloth and said he'd show everyone how to tame a hippo. According to him, the first step was provoking the hippo with the red cloth. He casually mentioned that cows aren't actually nervous about the color red, and the important part was exciting the target instead. At this point, the viewer was completely speechless, genuinely baffled by what he was hearing. Siwoo started waving the red cloth around, yelling at the hippos, trying to grab their attention. At first, the hippos lazily turned their heads toward the strange man, but the moment they noticed the red cloth, something snapped. Their expressions changed instantly. Right after that, the entire herd of hippos charged straight towards Siwoo. Instead of backing down, Siwoo kept luring them closer. When they finally got close enough, he calmly explained the next step on how to defeat a hippopotamus. The second step was apparently to just beat them and catch them. The video only got stranger from there, and the viewers seriously wondered if this was actually his real strategy. Then Siwoo threw the red cloth to the ground and rushed straight into the herd of hippos. He collided with them head-on. As he struck the first hippo, Siwoo shouted, "Rice noodles!" And when he hit the second one, he followed up by yelling, "Buckwheat noodles!" A short while later, the impossible happened. Siwoo had successfully knocked out every single hippo. He stood there, gave the camera a thumbs up, and asked the viewers, "What do you think? Was it really that easy?" Even though the video had ended, the moments of that collision, those words just kept replaying in the young man's head. Siwoo then told his viewers that if they found his strategy useful, they should like the video, subscribe to his channel, and turn on notifications. A massive number of viewers instantly appreciated the video. The clip Siwoo had uploaded about hunting hippos quickly gained traction, hitting an impressive 3,628 views, with 243 people subscribing to Siwoo's YouTube channel. Almost immediately, Siwoo couldn't help but grin as he checked the results, because this was exactly what he planned to see, and things didn't stop there. In a very short amount of time, a staggering 1,243 users had subscribed to the Conqueror of the World channel, and the hippo hunting video had exploded to 127,000 views. As Siwoo scrolled through the feed, he noticed countless comments, laughing at the video. For what he could tell, viewers genuinely loved the concept he had used in his previous upload. Still, he knew this success came largely from getting lucky with the YouTube algorithm. That also meant he couldn't keep hanging around low-level monsters forever. Since things had reached this point, Siwoo decided it was best to strike. While the iron was hot, he understood how audience interest worked. Because of high adaptability, stimulation always required increasing intensity to maintain strong attention. That kind of escalation was his specialty. After all, analyzing monsters and developing strategies was literally his job. Reaching 1 million subscribers wasn't just a fantasy. There was only one problem. All of a sudden, Siwoo noticed blood dripping from his nose. Almost immediately after that, an overwhelming wave of fatigue hit him, fighting to stay upright. He told himself that he still needed to edit the video. Dungeon raiding and deliveries, together, were clearly too much. In the end, his body gave out. He staggered backward, fell to the floor, hit his head on the table, then painfully struck it again against a chair. Eventually, Siwoo collapsed completely. He had been pushing himself way too hard lately. A bit later, Siwoo finally came to. His first thought was, "Where am I?" Then it hit him. He was staring at his own bedroom ceiling. Sitting up in bed, he tried to piece things together. He realized he'd been out cold for a while, and his head was still pounding fiercely. Thanks to Hercules' super strength, it all ended, with him barely surviving after pinching his nose. Siwoo muttered that he needed to hurry and edit the video. He pulled out his phone to check how long he'd been out. To his shock, the time read 4:31 a.m. He realized he'd been out cold for an entire day. That's when it hit him. If he kept going like this, he would die from pure exhaustion before making any real money. Because of that, Siwoo decided it was time to hire an editor. Sometime later, at Cafe Eden, Siwoo sat, sipping a cold drink while reviewing suitable candidates. When he'd written the job ad, he never expected so many people to apply. Maybe it was because of the high salary. The response was so intense. It felt like an idle audition. The base salary was 3 million won, with additional incentives depending on view count. As expected, money worked better than anything else, which was why he needed to choose someone who would make him the most money. Watching one candidate's sample video, Siwoo gave him a good rating. The sound effects were well-timed and funny, and his editing skills were clearly better than Siwoo's own. But it was already past 1 p.m. Siwoo was starting to lose patience. Why hadn't this guy shown up yet? All he knew was that the candidate's name was Park Do-aku. Earlier, Siwoo had suggested that the 14th applicant meet him at the cafe at 1 p.m., and the guy had agreed, even just from his name and the way he spoke. Siwoo had assumed he was an old-school guy, but that actually worked in his favor. Experience was exactly what he needed. Siwoo sent a message to Park Do-aku, asking where he was, but the message remained unread. He assumed he was rushing over and hadn't had time to check his phone, so he decided to wait a little longer. But that patience, it didn't last. Before long, something finally snapped. Siwoo slammed his fist on the table, a low mutter escaping him, wondering where the hell that bastard was. Just then, the cafe door swung open, and someone quickly hurried inside, immediately apologizing for their lateness. A nervous girl then awkwardly asked if he was Mong Si-woo. She then introduced herself simply as Park Deok-gu, an aspiring YouTube editor. Seeing a girl standing there completely threw him for a loop. He had imagined Park Deok-gu would be some kind of gruff, no-nonsense, old-school guy. Taking a seat, the girl apologized to Si-woo yet again. He immediately asked why she was late, and more importantly, why she hadn't even bothered to read his message. She explained that she had been up late editing a video deep into the night, then suddenly realized she had completely forgotten to pack her younger brother's lunchbox for a picnic. And because she was in such a frantic rush afterward, she hadn't had a chance to read his message before coming straight there. Si-woo then asked what she meant by editing a video. Deok-gu promptly replied that she was referring to the video she had attached to her application. Si-woo then asked if that meant she had edited the video he provided in just a single day. She calmly corrected him, saying that it hadn't taken her a full day, but only about 3 hours. Hearing that, Si-woo felt a strange, profound shock hit him. He had poured far more time into his own edits. Noticing his obvious reaction, the girl wondered if something was wrong with him. Si-woo turned toward her, making the girl nervous and afraid, thinking she was about to get a serious scolding. She squeezed her eyes shut and braced herself. Instead, Si-woo simply asked when she could actually start working. The girl, flustered, apologized again, suddenly realizing she had completely misread the entire situation, and quickly replied she could start right away. Si-woo thought about how it usually took him personally around 8 hours to edit a video. If each video only took her 3 hours, the efficiency alone was absolutely insane. He explained that, as stated in the advertisement, 2 videos per week was the standard requirement. Sometimes he uploaded 3 videos, and if that happened, she would, of course, be paid extra. Si-woo reached out a hand toward the girl, who was now on the verge of tears, and told her that, from this moment on, he was overjoyed to be under her wing. The girl slammed her head onto the table, agreeing wholeheartedly, and immediately shouted that she'd work her hardest. Right after that, panic erupted as people rushed past them, screaming about a nearby underground breach. Suddenly, a warning echoed through the area, announcing that an underground breach had just opened. It was identified as a C-rank breach, and residents in the surrounding area were urgently advised to evacuate immediately. A terrified Deok-gu shouted at her new boss that they needed to evacuate immediately. But instead of panicking, he just smirked and calmly asked her if she wasn't the one who just said she could start working. Right away, Deok-gu froze completely, unable to follow her boss's train of thought, and quickly apologized. Si-woo casually blew a wad of blood out of his nostril, then turned toward Deok-gu with that same relaxed smirk still on his face. He handed her his phone and told her to follow him. Confused and nervous, Deok-gu asked where they were even going. Si-woo simply asked her, "What do you think?" Of course, they were going to make money. The moment Deok-gu realized where they were headed, she gasped in shock. Even so, she still ran after Si-woo. As they moved, Si-woo shouted back at her about the video, reminding her to turn the camera on immediately. Right after that, orcs began pouring out from the dungeon gate, charging straight toward them. Si-woo yelled, "Rice noodles, large portion," and in the very next instant, he ripped a C-rank orc apart with a single devastating blow. Turning toward the camera mid-fight, he reminded viewers not to forget to like and subscribe, and also to turn on notifications. Wiping orc blood off his face, Si-woo wondered to himself if this was finally how he would start making some real money. Soon after, a group of hunters arrived at the site of the dungeon breach and immediately began helping nearby civilians evacuate. Suddenly, they heard a scream, and an orc's severed head flew straight over their heads. The hunters froze in shock, completely confused about what they were witnessing. Right in front of them, a young man was brutally beating orcs with his bare hands while loudly shouting out various noodle names. It wasn't long before Shu absolutely obliterated every single orc that dared to emerge from the dungeon. He then dramatically climbed atop the mountain of defeated foes, pumped his fist into the air, and turned to face the camera, once again urging viewers to smash that like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Back at home, Diogu found herself editing a brand new video for her boss. As she worked, her mind wouldn't stop racing, obsessed with what she'd just witnessed. She wondered, what in the world is even happening? And why was he so incredibly popular? The comments were overflowing with laughter at the utterly shocked reactions of everyone around him, while others marveled at how the conqueror of the world had just pulverized C-rank monsters with nothing but his bare hands. Many also showered praise on how clean and expertly the video was edited. Even after finishing the entire edit, Diogu still couldn't fully wrap her head around what was going on. But one thing was crystal clear to her. Her boss was a certified YouTube maniac, covering her face with her hands. Diogu wondered if she could truly succeed with this. Meanwhile, behind her, her younger siblings were happily devouring chicken, happily exclaiming how delicious it was, and making sure to save some for her too. They invited her to join them for a meal. Just then, her younger sister snatched up a chicken leg and declared, "This one's mine." Her brother immediately reminded her that she'd already had one and they should leave it for their sister. But Diogu, watching her younger siblings bicker and show care for one another, smiled softly. She finally understood what she had to do. She had to work hard, at least for the sake of her beloved younger brother and sister. Meanwhile, over at the smithy, our MC relentlessly continued forging weapons without a break. After pouring in a tremendous amount of effort, he finally succeeded in crafting a truly decent sword. This powerful piece of equipment had been fashioned using orc parts, obtained from the previous epic battle. Unlike his earlier attempts, this sword was expertly forged from top-tier class materials, meaning it was something he could finally truly rely on. As the forging process completed, his divine metallurgy skill increased by 1.4%, reaching a grand total of 4.43%. The system immediately commented that he crafted gear of surprisingly good quality, good enough to give away for free. Saiwa wasn't exactly thrilled to hear that, but he was still incredibly satisfied with the results. A 1.4% increase was absolutely massive, and considering how quickly his skill was progressing, the number itself was just mind-boggling. Kim Seon was visibly stunned when she saw the blade in Saiwa's hands. She showered him with praise, noting that his weapons quality just kept getting better. Paul Guang, on the other hand, couldn't fathom it at all. How could someone who'd only started practicing metallurgy less than a month ago reach this level already? It made zero sense to him. Saiwu simply chuckled, saying he still had a long way to go, which was totally true. He hadn't even mastered a tenth of Hepatitus's skills yet. Kim Seon then turned to Saiwu and asked if he was planning to sell that blade. Saiwu replied that she was right, adding that she surely knew exactly how to sell it. Seon told him to just hand everything over to her and reached out for the blade. Paul Guang watched the exchange silently, clearly not liking what he was seeing one bit. Seon then noticed that Saiwu looked much older today, and Saiwu asked if that was really the case. She smiled and said that lately, the bags under his eyes had almost reached his nose. Saiwu let out an awkward chuckle when he heard that. Seon followed up by saying she'd even been confused about whether he was a human or a zombie before, though now he finally looked human again, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. Ever since Diogu had started editing his videos, the boy had been getting much more sleep. He was still incredibly busy, but things were much more manageable, even though he had paid extra due to the danger last time. He didn't have much money left for expenses or additional staff. Helping with video shooting wasn't really an editor's job, so he knew he probably should have paid her more. Still, Saiwu had zero complaints about Dioga's editing. She was working extremely hard, and he was genuinely grateful to her. Suddenly, Saiwu remembered something he'd forgotten and asked, seeing how things were going with the medicinal herbs he had ordered from her earlier. Kim Zian clapped her hands, realizing she'd almost forgotten about herself. Immediately, she pulled out a bag, announcing she'd obtained everything he requested. After all, this was Siwoo's very first request. Siwoo was absolutely stunned by how quickly she'd gathered everything, and admitted, "That's incredible. Sian then reminded him that her company only sold the best product from Korea. Siwoo wondered what exactly she meant by that, and then asked how much it would all cost. Kim Sian then checked the details on her phone and replied that the total came to 212 million won. A flood of numbers flashed through Siwoo's mind. 212 million won was an absurd amount of money. Sian then said that since it was Siwoo's request, she'd give him a discount and lower the price to 200 million won, but there would be no discount next time. Siwoo sincerely thanked Sian for her help. A short while later, the boy hopped on a GodTube and started watching Hwadawa. In the video, Hwadawa explained that herbal medicine referred to purified natural medicines obtained from animal, plant, or mineral sources. These medicines mainly came in forms such as decoctions, powders, tablets, and creams, which were the most common types. Hwadawa stated that this particular video would focus on herbs. He explained that they were natural substances with medicinal effects, including plant roots, stems, bark, fruits, and seeds. Although used in small quantities, they played an important role as compound preparations. Because of that, specific forms of certain preparations could also be referred to as herbs. This meant it was incorrect to define herbs as only one fixed form. Listening to all of this, Siwoo found himself completely lost. He couldn't help but wonder what Hwadawa was even talking about. If things kept going like this, he felt he would never be able to improve his mastery of the divine art of medicine. The system then notified Siwoo that he had gained high knowledge, increasing his insight skill by 1.4% to 8.7% just from watching the video. Even that skill had gone up suddenly. Suddenly, something clicked for Siwoo. He had a major revelation. Peeling back Hwadawa's explanation to its core, it all came down to simply studying medicinal herbs, specifically those used to treat diseases. This, along with understanding their effects. The system instantly notified Siwoo that he had finally understood the correct definition of herbal medicine. What's more, his skill level in the divine art of medicine had now reached 0.4%. Siwoo was honestly confused by how he had managed to understand it correctly after all that. He couldn't help but wonder why Hwadawa had to overcomplicate such a simple concept so much. With his mastery now at 0.4%, Siwoo immediately began preparing medicine. He even succeeded in making a decoction that, according to the system, could be incredibly beneficial to his body. Staring at the decoction he had just made, which honestly looked like straight-up goblin piss, Siwoo questioned whether it was actually edible. And if it was said to be beneficial to his body, didn't that also mean it could potentially be harmful? Even so, he decided to drink it anyway. He lifted the bowl and downed in one go. The next instant, Siwoo crashed to the floor, spilling the precious decoction he had prepared everywhere. What hurt the most wasn't the fall, but the sheer amount of money he had spent on all of this. The cost of the herbs alone was insane. Suddenly, Siwoo heard a notification and reached for his phone. After drinking the decoction that was supposedly beneficial to his body, his superpower had actually increased by 0.01%. That result utterly shocked Siwoo. What made it even crazier was that less than 3 seconds had passed since he drank it. He even found himself wondering if he should lick whatever remained of it. Sometime later, the protagonist was seen inside an E-ranked dungeon. Vampire bats were E+ ranked monsters belonging to the bat family. There were several reasons he had come here today. First, he planned to shoot a video discussing whether bats were actually rats. Second, he needed to obtain vampire bat loot to create equipment. Finally, he had to study the diseases carried by vampire bats, especially since they lived in small groups of at least several dozen, sometimes even 100 strong. All kinds of diseases thrived among them. However, the most fascinating part was that vampire bats themselves were completely immune to illness. If these bats carried illnesses, possibly related to blood disorders, then discovering why they were also resistant might give him a clue to treating his sister's blood disorder. It wouldn't be easy, but with the divine art of medicine, anything was possible. Suddenly, Siwoo sensed something, and it wasn't bats. It was the distinct sound of footsteps. He immediately leaped higher, hiding himself behind a rock, deciding it would be best to avoid contact, just in case. When he finally identified the source of the footsteps, surprise flashed across his mind. It was Kong Du-chul's sidekicks. This situation made absolutely no sense, as long as the dungeon had been assigned solely to him by the hunter. Management Bureau. Other hunters were strictly forbidden from entering. Coincidences could happen, but it felt highly unlikely that Kong Du-chul's lackeys had just wandered in by accident. These guys were roughly B-class hunters, which made their presence in an E-plus ranked dungeon even more suspicious. Saiwu immediately assumed they had come specifically for him. A dungeon was, after all, an isolated space, without internet or communication networks. This meant no one would even know if someone died inside. Saiwu briefly considered his next move, then questioned why he was even thinking about it. After all, everything would become crystal clear once he simply dealt with them. Meanwhile, the lackeys chattered among themselves, confirming that Saiwu had indeed entered the dungeon. Duna was confident because he'd personally seen Saiwu go inside. Kim Jiwoo nervously looked around, wondering why Saiwu was nowhere to be seen. Jimin Keol then suggested that Saiwu might have already died inside. Kim Jiwoo recalled that Saiwu was a completely useless awakened one, even worse than F-class hunters, and wondered, how could someone like that even enter a dungeon alone and with such unwavering confidence? Regardless, it certainly made their task much easier. Ji Min-chul spread his arms, admitting that while he didn't know how Siwoo handled everything else, but he was at least smart enough to devise some kind of strategy against those vampire bats. Kim Ji-woo dismissed the idea, questioning what a talentless person like Siwoo could possibly do. Yuna, however, mentioned that after watching that video, it didn't seem like Siwoo relied solely on strategy. Ji Min-chul doubted it, reasoning the video could easily have been manipulation or computer graphics editing. He even looked around and suggested that this entire place could be a set, rather than a real dungeon. Kim Ji-woo agreed that anything was possible. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed through the cave, followed immediately by something rushing past them. Siwoo appeared behind Kim Ji-woo and demanded to know Kong Du-chul's current whereabouts. Kim Ji-woo was terrified, having failed to sense Siwoo's movement at all. Siwoo openly admitted he hadn't expected them to reveal information so easily, and noted he hoped they wouldn't answer him, taking advantage of the brief moment when Siwoo stood still. Kim Ji-woo leaped aside. Ji Min-chul demanded to know where Siwoo had come from. Do Yuna questioned whether Siwoo had chosen to fight them. Kim Ji-woo mocked him, wondering what a useless idiot like Siwoo could possibly do, before rushing forward to finish him off. Before Ji-woo could get close, Siwoo casually waved his hand, knocking the sword out of Ji-woo's grip. He followed up with another strike, sending Kim Ji-woo flying. As Ji-woo tried to stand, a painful sob escaped him. Siwoo reflected on what he was about to do and accepted it without hesitation. He kicked Kim Ji-woo in the head while he lay on the ground. Do Yuna and Ji Min-chul were visibly shaken by what they had just witnessed. Ji Min-chul cursed Siwoo for his actions, but in the very next moment, he found himself pinned against the cave wall, stunned. Yuna turned toward Min-chul, realizing that the situation had turned against them. Yuna tried to negotiate, offering to drop his sword and spill everything. Siwoo still wanted answers, but even after hearing this, Siwoo didn't stop advancing. Yuna repeated his offer, but Siwoo made it crystal clear he had no intention of trusting the words of someone who still had all their limbs intact. After finishing the brutal beating, Siwoo turned his attention to Yuna, pressing him hard for answers. He wanted to know if Kong Du-chul had been the one who ordered them to teach him a lesson. Yuna quietly admitted that it was true. Siwoo then asked if Yuna wanted to be awarded honorary marks for his honesty. Yuna lifted his swollen face and begged him not to do that, insisting he was telling the absolute truth. Siwoo demanded to know why Du-chul had done this, and why he was so fixated on him. Yuna admitted that he genuinely did not know. Unhappy with the answer, Siwoo clenched his fist And when Yuna noticed this, he hurriedly insisted again that he truly knew nothing. Siwoo then asked where Duchul was currently located, but before Yuna could respond, Siwoo told him to forget the question altogether. He reasoned that Yuna should instead pick up his friends and scram. Yuna was shocked, wondering if Siwoo had really spared them after beating them so severely. Siwoo made it clear he hadn't killed them. And Siwoo then instructed Yuna to pass along a message to Duchul, making it clear that next time, the same thing would happen to him. Siwoo grabbed Yuna by the face and emphasized the message, making sure it wouldn't be difficult for him to repeat it. Sometime later, the crippled Yuna, Ji Minchul, and Kim Jiwoo gathered in front of Kong Duchul. Duchul was left speechless by the sight of them. At that moment, Mong Siwoo appeared between Yuna and Ji Minchul, casually, noting that it had been a long time since he and Duchul had last seen each other, roughly about a month, and even commented on whether Duchul had been eating well. Kim Jiwoo desperately tried to explain to his boss that everything Ji Minju had claimed it was all a misunderstanding, then followed up by stating that Siwoo had actually ordered them to do it, and how unfair the whole situation was for them. Siwoo, meanwhile, wrapped an arm around Yuna, seemingly in friendship, praising him for his clever plan to lure Kong Dokil out into the open. Yuna immediately raised his hands in surrender, claiming he had been completely set up. Siwoo then told Yuna he would grant his request to kill that jerk Dokil. In that instant, Yuna broke free from Siwoo's grasp and bolted. Ji Minchul and Kim Ji-woo followed right after him, apologizing to their boss as they fled for their lives. Siwoo then turned his attention back to Dokil, pointing out that Dokil was now completely alone. He explained that this was exactly why Dokil should have treated his lackeys better, questioning how badly he must have truly treated them for them to willingly order his death. Kong Dokil still couldn't understand how an E-rank hunter like Siwoo could possess such overwhelming power. Siwoo admitted that he himself wasn't entirely sure, but it always showed up at just the right moment. He then demanded an answer to one question, asking why Dokil had treated him this way. Dokil questioned whether there was any reason he should answer Siwoo. Siwoo made it clear that there was no obligation at all. Immediately after that, Siwoo leaped toward Dokil and swung his fist. Dokil reacted just in time, swinging his sword to block the attack. The clash made it clear to Siwoo that he couldn't trust the words of a man with intact limbs. Through this confrontation, Siwoo fully realized how different the situation was, as Dokil was a B-class hunter. Dokil followed up with a horizontal slash, but Siwoo managed to swiftly duck under the blade. Dokil couldn't help but acknowledge the clean dodge. Siwoo jumped back immediately, creating distance between them. He admitted to himself that Dokil's reaction speed was far better than expected. Thinking about Dokil's sheer cruelty and power sent a chill straight through him. While even a decent blow from him could shatter a sword, he still lacked the refined skill to successfully block a B-rank hunter's weapon. Dachel exploded from the ground and charged forward aggressively. His attacks were lightning fast, yet predictable, making them possible to dodge. Siwoo crouched low, evading the strike and instantly countering with a devastating blow to Dachel's stomach. At that moment, memories from his past flooded back. He'd worked as an editor for Do. Back then, he'd been treated like a slave, trapped in dungeons, and beaten countless times over trivial mistakes. He had filmed Dachel fighting monsters countless times, replaying the footage hundreds of times while editing. Through those very videos, he had subconsciously analyzed Dachel's habits, tendencies, and unique behavior. As a result, Siwoo's insight skill had increased by 0.5%, reaching a total of 9.2%. At the last moment, Dachel barely managed to block Siwoo's fist. Again and again, the two clashed, neither gaining the upper hand. Dachel unleashed a powerful vertical strike from above, but Siwoo expertly dodged, as if he already knew the attack was coming. After so many eerily precise reactions, Dachel began to suspect something truly unnatural, briefly wondering if Siwoo could read his mind. He immediately dismissed the thought, reminding himself that he was a B-rank hunter, while Siwoo was merely a plus level. Such a feat should only be possible for an S-rank hunter. Seizing the opportunity, Saiwu finally landed a solid punch squarely on Dachul's face. The impact sent Dachul flying backward. He stabbed his sword deep into the ground, gripping it tightly to stop himself from falling. Yet he was still forced back. Dachul trembled in disbelief. It felt impossible. He had studied Saiwa's abilities through YouTube videos, but reality far exceeded what he believed. Dachul suddenly unleashed his raw energy, his expression twisting, as he declared his intent to kill Saiwu right then and there. Saiwu retreated, raising his hand, making it clear there was no need to push things this far. Dachul, however, had completely abandoned all restraint. With Dachul going all out, Saiwu realized he had no choice but to do the same. Saiwu felt his muscles begin to tear again. Fighting at full strength meant he wouldn't be able to last long. He resolved to give his absolute all. Pushing off the ground, he shot forward. Like lightning, all Doho managed to perceive was Siwoo's blurred figure, appearing right before him in an instant. A devastating punch immediately followed, triggering a massive explosion across the battlefield. A short time later, the inspection bureau arrived at the wrecked construction site. The commander immediately ordered the area sealed off and instructed her subordinates to search for survivors. Several agents stepped up, announcing their presence, and began searching the site. As the dust slowly settled, they spotted a man standing, a sword still in his hand. The commander asked if his name was Mong Siwoo. Without stepping off the defeated Kong Du Cheol beneath him, Siwoo confirmed his identity. The commander then presented her identification and introduced herself as Lee Minyoung, commander of the 4th Guard Unit of the Inspection Bureau. She requested Siwoo accompany them to the bureau. Once inside the bureau, Lee Minyoung confirmed, if she had understood correctly, that a hunter named Kong Daho had attempted to kill him. Siwoo confirmed that this was exactly what happened, and added that he'd already submitted video evidence. Lee Min-young acknowledged that she had reviewed and approved the footage, although the situation was serious and couldn't be easily ignored. Hunter Meng Siwoo was listed as an awakened individual without features. The Guardians were essentially the police force, responsible for protecting hunters, yet in reality, they specialized in hunting down criminal hunters who murdered people. Siwoo had previously heard that squad leaders were appointed from hunters of at least A rank, and the aura radiating from the woman sitting across from him truly resembled that of a killer. Siwoo asked if the rank of a trait was related to a hunter's rank. Lee Min-young responded, stating she already knew Siwoo was ranked E+. Siwoo confirmed this before Lee Min-young could even continue. Siwoo then questioned if there was any reason at all why he needed to answer such questions. After all, he was the victim here. Lee Min-young quickly apologized, explaining that her job had given her a habit of suspecting absolutely everyone. Based on the video evidence from the Arachnid dungeon and the abandoned construction site Siwoo had submitted, the Bureau would handle everything appropriately. Lee Min-young declared that Kong Du Cheol would never see the light of day again and suggested ending the investigation right there. She then thanked Siwoo for his cooperation. The boy opened the door, stating that in that case, he'd leave everything in her capable hands. Moments after Siwoo left the inspection bureau, the door opened again. A guard entered, appearing. Surprised, the squad leader was still there, noting that Hunter Meng Siwoo had just left and assuming she wouldn't still be there. Lee Min-young admitted, but the situation is strange. Jun Suai Balayas, saying she didn't understand what the commander meant. Lee Min-young then asked Suwa about her rank. The sudden question startled her, and she replied that she'd recently been promoted to B rank. At that instant, the atmosphere in the room grew unbearably heavy, and Suwa, unable to endure the pressure, collapsed to the floor, confused and shaken. Suwa looked toward the squad leader. Lee Min-young commented, as expected, Suwa couldn't handle it. Suwa thought this result should have been obvious, considering the squad leader was no ordinary guard. With a puzzled expression, Lee Min-young remarked, Hunter Meng Siwoo didn't feel anything at all. Suwa was stunned by this revelation, wondering how that was possible. When Siwu was only an E+ rank hunter, Lee Min-young agreed, admitting it was indeed strange. Sua questioned, why was Siwu allowed to leave so easily, especially considering there are hunters who conceal their true rank? Lee Min-young cut her off, explaining it's because Siwu isn't strange and carries a human scent. Left alone, Sua quietly wondered what kind of nonsense that explanation truly was. Meanwhile, Siwu was walking home, feeling satisfied with how everything had turned out. Yet, he couldn't stop thinking about when something like this might happen again. If his YouTube channel continued to grow, he could easily become a target for criminal organizations at his current level. Even dealing with Kong Du Chul had been difficult. Without the accumulated knowledge of Du Chul's habits, behavior patterns, and the assistance of his S+ insight, he would have died much earlier. As he thought about the challenges ahead, his most important trait stood out: his SS-level superpower, which stubbornly refused to increase. Siwu reflected on why his superpower remained stuck at 1%. Earlier, the system had congratulated him on winning an individual training session with Hercules. It was a free session awarded in celebration of reaching 1 subscriber, something Siwu considered completely insane. When he checked Hercules' channel, Siwu was surprised to see that it still had only 1 subscriber. That alone convinced him the reward had to be something significant. Hercules himself was shocked by what he had learned. Seeing his only subscriber, he had assumed it was a human, but the idea of a human accessing his channel made no sense to him. Siwu asked whether that meant nothing would work. Hercules explained that it wasn't exactly like that, but if the situation continued, he wouldn't be able to conduct a personal training session. Siwu wondered whether that meant he would be unable to accept the training at all. Hercules clarified that this was not the case. Since he could not physically go to Siwu's location, a face-to-face training session was impossible. This led Siwu to think about how he had even connected to GodTube in the first place, recalling the blonde man who had left him the smartphone and the white-haired man he had fought. Hercules loudly interjected and explained that even if he could not correct Siwu's posture in person, he could still teach him properly. He smoothly reassured Siwu not to worry through the camera. Hercules keenly observed Siwu's physique, noting his balance was already excellent, especially his back muscles. Siwu pondered if Hercules was referring specifically to his back. Hercules sighed deeply, then clarified that the back muscles referred to all muscles on the back of the body, with what he'd mentioned being only a portion of them. He emphasized that these muscles acted as armor. He then listed the trapezius muscles, the triceps, and the brachioradialis. Siwu was utterly astonished by the sheer number of muscles Hercules described. After learning about proper muscle engagement, Siwu managed to slightly increase his super strength skill, finally reaching 1.02%. Hercules explained that there were many different types of back muscles, and because they were located behind the body and couldn't be seen, people often forgot their importance. He then raised his leg and stressed that these muscles were extremely important. Lowering his leg, he stomped the ground and explained that they were essential for maintaining overall body balance during powerful movements. Siwu was deeply impressed and wondered what he had just witnessed. Hercules asked if Siwu had noticed it. He then explained that the technique was called divine martial arts, something he had personally created. Siwu felt utterly confused by this explanation. Hercules clarified that it was nothing extraordinary, simply a system that combined all of his combat techniques into one. This was the same strike he had used to crush the Hydra, destroying it instantly by striking the center of its head. Regardless, Hercules emphasized that the back muscles were crucial in these techniques and that the lower body served as the foundation supporting everything. He asked Siwu to consider what would happen if the pillars of a building collapsed during construction. Siwu understood the structure would fall apart. Hercules immediately reinforced the comparison, stating that the same principle applied to the human body before hitting the ground with a thud once more. Siwu realized that if his lower body gave out, the same pathetic collapse would happen again. Hercules finished by explaining. He'd teach an exercise method, perfectly suited for his unique subscriber, and advised Siwoo to carefully observe and copy his movements. A short while later, Hercules explained to Siwoo that the core principle of breathing was to exhale when lifting off the ground. Siwoo mentally noted that this particular advice sounded far more normal than he'd ever expected. Immediately afterward, Hercules abruptly shouted he didn't care about breathing or any other minuscule details, and Siwoo should just exhale. Completely worn out, Siwoo wondered why this even mattered. Hercules advised him to take a good look at himself before daring to question anything, emphasizing that for a small fry like him, it was more important to act first without asking questions. During his intense training with Hercules, Siwoo received numerous system notifications, indicating he'd completed superpower exercises. As a result, his superpower skill steadily increased, eventually reaching an impressive 1.47%. Siwoo then sent a message to his editor, informing her the video would be uploaded to YouTube, and that the concept for the day's content was a speedrun. He left all editing responsibilities to her. Park Daiko thought her boss was a good person, though admittedly a little unusual. Giggling to herself, she wondered what crazy strategy he'd cooked up this time. She then played the video footage where her boss was standing near the dungeon. Siwoo was dressed in a bat costume and greeted the subscribers of the Conqueror of the World channel. Behind him, inside the cave, visible to viewers, vampire bats were living. Anticipating the obvious question, Siwoo explained why he was there. The purpose was to present new content for the Conqueror of the World channel. Nothing more than a speedrun raid. Daiko decided to begin editing from that point, adding sound effects and visual enhancements. Still, she couldn't help but wonder, why had he chosen to film vampire bats of all things? These creatures were notorious for thriving in harsh, low-visibility environments, and their sheer numbers made speedrun filming incredibly difficult. Then again, this approach would definitely grab attention. Once more, Siwoo grabbed his phone, explaining that his research had revealed the current dungeon clearing record of 58 seconds was still held by S-rank hunter Yu Hanoi from the Fire Witch channel. He declared his intention to break that record today. This would be a speedrun raid by the Conqueror of the World channel in the Vampire Bat Dungeon, starting immediately. Deku decided to insert a timer for this segment. Suddenly, something unusual caught her attention. Observing the bizarre stance her boss was taking, Deku wondered if he'd started doing gymnastics. Shoo loudly declared the banquet challenge and immediately lowered his leg the moment his foot touched the ground. A deafening rumble echoed through the dungeon, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Daiko was left completely stunned, barely believing what she had just witnessed. Afterward, she wondered if it was even possible to collapse an entire dungeon. Siu slapped himself on the head, reminding himself that he still needed to collect the ingredients. Regardless, the raid was already over. Daiko was left wondering in fear what exactly she had just seen. Yet, she still believed her boss was a good person. After checking his phone, Siu was delighted by the astonishing statistics. His channel had already reached 1.4 million views and 6,810 subscribers, and the numbers continue to rise. Even more surprisingly, Yu Hanoi from the Fire Witch channel, who had 41 million subscribers, had left a comment under the video. Siwoo grinned, clearly sensing she had rushed over in a panic after learning her top position had been taken. The mere fact that the Fire Witch herself had commented already carried tremendous impact. If they ever collaborated, 1 million viewers? Guaranteed. Siwoo forced himself to calm down. At times like these, he knew he had to make his content even more outrageous. He checked his stats and saw his superpower level had just reached 2.01% after his individual training with Hercules. The skill that had stubbornly refused to budge had now rocketed past 2%. With just 2%, he was already capable of annihilating a dungeon, crawling with vampire bats. If his skill increased further, He wouldn't mind asking Hercules to teach him divine martial arts. Later, after some time passed, Hercules firmly refused Siwoo's request. Siwoo insisted that Hercules teach him during their individual training, but Hercules rejected him yet again. Siwoo reminded him that he had already won, yet Hercules stated these were entirely different matters. Siwoo wondered what he meant by different, and Hercules explained that individual training and teaching divine martial arts were separate things, each with its own definition. Moreover, for a weakling like Siwoo, building muscle was the primary concern. Divine martial arts were a method Hercules had created to match his own strength, and without sufficient superpowers, Siwoo wouldn't be able to use them. Siwoo stated that he was already using his superpowers, which greatly shocked Hercules. Hercules' projection unfortunately expanded in size as he questioned whether Siwoo was truly using his power. Siwoo confirmed that he was, and that Hercules himself was providing personal training. Hercules clarified that personal training simply referred to individual lessons and was not meant to involve teaching his own superpowers. Siwoo was surprised by this explanation and reminded Hercules that he had indeed studied his superpowers. Hercules replied that this was impossible. Siwoo then wondered whether it was normal to study the traits of gods on GodTube, or if what he had studied was not actually Hercules' superpower. Hercules asked Siwoo to wait briefly. Immediately afterward, Hercules used his power to create a projection. Stunned by the incredible sight before him, Hercules seized Siwoo by the shoulders, demanding to know how he'd pulled it off. He questioned if Siwoo had truly learned divine powers just by subscribing to his channel, and if the same went for other GodTube deities. Siwoo confessed that it was indeed the case, noting how utterly ridiculous it seemed. Hercules roared, "Absolutely ridiculous! Gaining the powers of actual gods just by subscribing to their channels was total nonsense." Siwoo calmly pointed out it worked. For him, Hercules told Siwoo to hold on a moment, then highlighted something truly bizarre. The real mystery was how Siwoo had connected to GodTube in the first place. Siwoo was an ordinary person, devoid of any divinity, yet he'd stumbled upon this unbelievable opportunity. After hearing Siwoo's tale, Hercules reflected on the two individuals Siwoo had met earlier. Upon closer consideration, they did indeed seem to be from GodTube. Siwoo wondered if beings from GodTube could actually enter their world, given Hercules had previously stated they couldn't. Hercules explained their dimensions simply couldn't interfere with one another. He then asked Siwoo if he remembered his GodTube account was a manager account. If so, one of the individuals Siwoo had encountered must have been a manager. Siwoo questioned if Hercules knew who the GodTube managers were. Hercules admitted he only knew a few. Even so, Hercules stressed that Siwoo absolutely shouldn't have been able to gain divine powers merely by signing up with a manager account. Siwoo pondered if that was truly the case. Hercules explained that if such a thing were possible, managers would effortlessly become gods of the universe themselves. Nevertheless, he was certain Siwoo had somehow obtained divine powers. Siwoo smiled tensely and asked Hercules to take him on as a disciple. But Hercules flat out refused once more. Siwoo questioned why he kept refusing. Hercules replied it was far too troublesome. Siwoo reminded him that he'd already mastered divine powers, but Hercules countered that those were entirely different matters. Altogether, even providing individual training, this was already a hassle, and piling divine martial arts on top was totally unacceptable. Seeing how unyielding Hercules remained, SIU decided to ask one last question. He wondered what GodTube subscribers truly represented. Hercules looked puzzled, and after a brief pause, explained that subscribers could be understood as a form of divinity. SIU interpreted this to mean the more subscribers one had, the higher their divine status became. While he didn't fully grasp the concept, he understood that more subscribers were generally better. This was why Hercules continued to provide individual training despite finding it annoying. Subscribers were the only thing Hercules cared about besides muscles. With that in mind, Siwoo proposed a deal. If he could help Hercules gain 100 subscribers, then Hercules would have to teach him divine martial arts. Hercules wondered how Siwoo could possibly accomplish that, considering he couldn't even reach him physically. Leaning closer to Hercules' small figure, Siwoo questioned why Hercules wouldn't trust him, and gave him a thumbs up shortly afterward. Hercules' channel skyrocketed to 34,241 views and 127 subscribers. Hercules reappeared before Siwoo and bowed deeply, addressing him as Master. He declared that from that day onward, he would become Siwoo's loyal servant. Siwoo promised he'd continue providing interesting video ideas, which only strengthened Hercules' resolve. Siwoo reminded him that in return, Hercules must teach him divine martial arts. Kneeling, Hercules questioned whether he even dared refuse. Siwoo asked what the number of subscribers truly represented. Hercules explained it was a form of trust. Divine status was built upon the trust of others, meaning the more people knew about them, the stronger they became. Followed by lengthy explanations, all Siwoo understood was that the system was extremely complicated. Divine status increased with subscribers, though he was still unsure whether he fully understood it. Regardless, Hercules promised to teach him divine martial arts immediately. Siwoo asked Hercules to speak calmly before they continued. Hercules agreed, proposing they begin immediately. The first requirement for divine martial arts wasn't physical strength, but rather training the brain's muscles, instead of explaining. Further, Hercules decided to demonstrate. Suddenly, Siwoo's head began throbbing, as if it would split apart. This was the result of Hercules striking the air. Siwoo struggled to comprehend what was happening. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't perceive Hercules' movements at all. An overwhelming pressure bore down on him. The system then notified Siwoo that he had mastered Hercules' divine martial arts. His superpower skill dramatically increased by 1.1%, reaching a total of 3.61%. Siwoo was stunned. A skill that had previously only increased by 0.1% had now surged by over 1% in a single moment. Even more astonishing, it had reached SSS rank. Hercules cautioned that Siwoo couldn't handle it yet. He explained that Siwoo's soul level was still insufficient, and using divine martial arts in this state would completely overload his mind. He needed to develop his brain muscles first. In simpler terms, brain muscles represented the level of one's soul, or mental strength. Without a strong psyche, mastering divine martial arts was impossible. Siwoo wondered if Hercules could have explained this earlier. Hercules apologized, admitting he didn't talk much. Siwoo interrupted, asking if he would still be able to learn it. Hercules admitted that under normal circumstances, it would be impossible, but since it was Siwoo, it might be possible. Siwoo asked what he meant. Hercules reminded him that Siwoo could obtain the powers of gods. At that moment, Siwoo understood. If he could obtain the power of a god, specializing in mental strength to support Hercules' immense power, then gods such as Jesus, Buddha, or Confucius could be potential options. Hercules recommended Master Confucius's channel. This meant subscribing to the channel and paying a monthly fee. Checking his balance, Siwoo grimaced. He had only 153 million won. Subscribing to Hwaduwa's channel had already cost him 100 million with a 1 billion won fee. The situation was just absurd and clearly completely unprofitable. Siwoo wasn't exactly in a mood to make any big decisions. The question of whether this was truly the right path weighed heavily on him. It lingered heavily in his mind. Suddenly, Kim Seon-eun burst into the forge, raising her hand to signal her return. She then handed Siwoo the ogre tendon he had wanted so desperately. The boy immediately asked about the price. Previously, she had mentioned it would cost a mere 1 million won. But this time, Kim Seon-eun stated the cost was a whopping 113 million won. After parting with another 113 million won, the boy thanked Seon-eun, tears welling in his eyes. Kim Seon-eun politely thanked him for using Seon's products. Siwoo's current account balance plummeted to 40,450,000 won. Seon-eun then asked what Siwoo planned to do with the ogre tendon. He explained that this time, he intended to craft equipment. The ogre was an A+ rank monster, which meant he was still unable to hunt one alone. Even so, if he wanted to learn divine martial arts, he would need 1 billion won. That meant using high-quality materials to create high-quality equipment and selling it. Through this process, he would also gain experience, so he could eventually make equipment for himself. Thinking about how distant that future still seemed, Saiwu cried. Again, money remained his eternal enemy. Even so, he decided to begin immediately, returning to the forge. Co Pogwang felt an intense wave of heat and heard the steady sound of hammer strikes. As he approached Kim Seon-eun, Pogwang asked what had brought her there. Kim Seon-eun, however, was so shocked by what she saw that she didn't respond. Pogwang then turned his gaze towards Saiwu and froze, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Saiwu had finished creating the equipment and smiled as he watched it gleam. The system notified him he had produced a disposable product, which caused his metallurgy skill to increase significantly by 5%, reaching 10.43%. Despite pouring everything into it, the result was still only a disposable item, which left him incredibly dissatisfied. As soon as he finished, Paul Guang and Kim Seon rushed over, both utterly amazed by his craftsmanship and desperate to know his secret. But Saiwu, instead of explaining, just asked, "Seon, how much do you think this equipment could fetch?" This completely stumped her. She genuinely wondered if he was serious about selling it at all. Gear of this incredible caliber was completely out of her league, and none of their usual customers could ever dream of affording something like this. Hearing this, Saiwu felt a pang of disappointment. What was the point of crafting the gloves if he couldn't even sell them? Still, he told Seon not to worry and asked her to sell the gloves for him anyway, reminding her they were just disposable items. Seon was utterly shocked to hear such magnificent gloves called disposable, but since Saiwu had entrusted them to her, she promised to do her absolute best. "Leave everything to me," she declared, then turned to Paul Guang. She needed his permission to use his name. Kim Seon explained she planned to put the gloves up for auction. Sometime later, inside the bustling auction hall, the auctioneer's voice boomed, announcing the next item. The announcer proudly stated that the upcoming lot was a piece of equipment so exquisite that even Master Co Paul Guang himself couldn't help but marvel at it. The guests immediately erupted into whispers, as everyone knew Co Palwang was a legendary blacksmith, personally recognized by our lion. The auctioneer dramatically removed the cloth covering the item, revealing a pair of breathtaking, high-quality gloves. The auctioneer then explained that these gloves were expertly crafted from ogre tendons, making them incredibly durable and completely eliminating any concerns about them breaking accidentally. During combat, the audience was told not to be surprised, as the materials came from an A-rank monster. According to the appraisal results, these gloves were capable of strengthening their wearer. As soon as this was mentioned, a low murmur swept through the entire hall. Many immediately assumed the gloves were enchanted equipment, something only Master Aurelian himself was capable of creating. The auctioneer flashed an awkward smile and quickly clarified that the gloves were not enchanted. Instead, they provided a slight enhancement of approximately 5 stat points. Even so, they were still equipped with a special effect and functioned much like any other auxiliary equipment. Judging by the buzzing excitement in the room, the auctioneer realized that dragging things out any longer would only provoke the crowd, and quickly moved to open the bidding. The starting price was set at a hefty 10 million won, with increments of 5 million won, and almost immediately, bids began pouring in, quickly rising from 10 to 15, 20, and then 25 million won. The competition really intensified, and within mere seconds, the price skyrocketed to 50 million won. At that point, the auctioneer, unfazed, announced that future bids would now increase by 10 million won, as if it were pocket change. The price rapidly escalated through 60, 70, 80, 90, and then a staggering 100 million won. The bidding rules were changed yet again, increasing each bid by a whopping 50 million won. But even this failed to slow the momentum. and the price surged to 250 million won moments later. The gloves reached an astonishing 350 million won, and the entire hall fell into a brief silence. Scanning the tense room, the auctioneer asked if there were any higher bids. Suddenly, one guest called out a shocking bid of 2 billion won. The audience turned in absolute shock to see Han Sharon. The auctioneer herself was visibly shaken by this sudden, colossal jump in price and repeated the bid of 2 billion won, asking again for any higher offers. Almost immediately, another bid came in at 2.1 billion won. The crowd gasped upon realizing the bidder was none other than Lee Min-young. Whispers then spread rapidly as people recognized her as the butcher, Lee Min-young. Han Sharon raised the price again, boldly, to 3 billion won. Gritting her teeth, Lee Min-young quickly countered with 3.1 billion, as if she had been waiting for it. Han Sharon then declared a final bid of 4 billion won. The auctioneer repeated the staggering final bid of 4 billion won and began the final count. With no further bids, the gloves were officially sold for 4 billion won. Having secured the item she wanted, Han Sharon was clearly very, very pleased. Sometime later, at the Seo family's blacksmith shop, Siwoo stood trembling in utter shock. Kim Seoin was just as stunned and openly admitted that she had never once, ever imagined these gloves would sell for such an utterly outrageous price. From the auction gloves, Siwoo received a mind-blowing 3.6 billion won, an amount that felt completely unreal. The winning bid had been 4 billion won, and even after deducting the 5% auction commission and CN service fee, a staggering 3.6 billion won remained in his account. Overwhelmed by emotion, Seo suddenly hugged Kim Seojun tightly and shouted his thanks to her. Kim Seojun immediately protested, urging him to stop because he was squeezing her too hard. Realizing what he was doing, Siwoo quickly released her as she tried to catch her breath. He explained that he had simply been too excited. Wanting to show his gratitude, Siwoo offered to give her something in return for her troubles. Kim Seoun refused, explaining that he had already paid her fairly for her services. More importantly, thanks to him, Seon's company had become a VIP client at the auction house, which was more than enough for her. Hearing this, Siwoo then offered to help Seo Palwang instead, but Palwang refused as well. He explained that he didn't mind because Siwoo had done everything himself while he had done nothing at all. Siwoo then decided that he would teach Seo Palwang how to play the Allegro rhythm, something he had recently learned from a video by Hephaestus. He also mentioned a 4-beat rhythm that would likely suit him just as well. After that, the most important moment came when Siwoo picked up his phone and paid for a subscription to the Confucius channel, losing a whopping 1 billion won in the process. He had no choice but to subscribe, as learning divine martial arts required it. There was no room for being stingy. Even so, the amount was enormous. The poor boy barely managed to hold back his tears as he stared at his new subscription, fully aware of how much it had cost him. Sometime later, Seo cautiously asked her brother whether this place was too expensive, adding that they didn't have to eat there. Siwoo explained that they were there because experiences like this had to be tried at least once in a lifetime. The cost was 600,000 won per person, but he didn't mind. Even after everything, he still had a hefty 2.6 billion won left in his account. With his subscriptions to the Huadahua and Confucius channels, he was now shelling out a staggering 1.1 billion won monthly on subscriptions. To take his mind off those hefty expenses, Siwoo decided to have a drink while waiting for their food. He decided to tune into GodTube. Meanwhile, Soa looked around with curiosity, since it was her first time being in such a luxurious place. Siwoo opened the Confucius channel and immediately read the description. It stated that although Confucius was slow and unable to speak, he was quick in action and had over 34,000 subscribers. Siwoo assumed that this was a large number and wondered whether all of Confucius's students had subscribed. This thought sparked a realization that school-like networks also existed On GodTube, earlier, Hercules had explained that studying divine martial arts required brain power. Based on that, Siwoo deduced this discipline was SSS rank. Since it was not combat-related, an SSS rank implied a level even higher than divine martial arts. If he wanted to improve his skill level, he would need to carefully watch the videos and understand them as deeply as possible. Siwoo started with the first video on the main page, titled The Dignity of a Gentleman. In the video, Confucius was calmly resting in a garden pavilion and explained that a gentleman was someone who cared for and protected those around him. As he watched, Siwoo immediately felt something, extreme boredom. Even so, he still managed to grasp the fundamentals of Confucianism and the levels of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom of an SSS-ranked gentleman increased slightly. Hercules had pointed out that even though Siwoo had acquired the brain power of Master Confucius, he had not done so completely. Siwoo had admitted this and acknowledged that his level of mastery was still lacking. Hercules had then explained that divine martial arts were not something Siwoo could currently use. In simpler terms, it was similar to altering the very laws of the world. Instead of merely activating a superpower to wield divine martial arts, Siwoo would have to draw upon mana by focusing on veins and pressure points. Mana itself was the very source of existence. To manipulate it more effectively, he would need an amplifying organ, something that could project intention and directly influence mana. Eastern gods referred to this as the center of Qi. Judging by Siwoo's expression, Hercules assumed he found all of this unbearably boring and likely had no idea what was being explained. Suddenly, a flash burst from the phone screen, startling Siwoo and making him instinctively cover himself. Hercules then poked him on the head and pointed out that Siwoo wanted to learn divine martial arts and acquire that power, but showed no interest in studying complicated theories. Hercules questioned whether he was wrong. Even if Siwoo wanted to deny it, he knew he couldn't. Siwoo admitted that Hercules was completely right. Hercules stated that this reaction was exactly what he had expected, and revealed he'd already devised a way to help Siwoo master divine martial arts more easily. The solution once again lay in muscles. Not understanding how everything kept circling back to this, Siwoo was left confused. Hercules explained that if the body was weak, the mind would inevitably suffer. Siwoo considered whether the opposite might be true, but Hercules countered that as Siwoo strengthened his body, his mind would naturally begin to grasp complex concepts on its own. Hercules flexed his muscles and advised Siwoo to leave all headache-inducing knowledge to his muscles instead. Instead, faced with that explanation, Siwoo was left completely speechless. The scene then shifted to the SH Group headquarters. Mr. Han Tayson spoke to his granddaughter, mentioning that he'd heard she'd purchased new equipment. Han Sharon confirmed that this was true and admitted she was very satisfied with it. Mr. Han added that he'd also heard the equipment had cost $4 billion. Sharon acknowledged and explained that even if it couldn't quite rival Master Aurelian's sword, it was still incredible support equipment. Just wearing one piece made her feel like her total abilities had soared to an entirely new level. The chairman expressed his satisfaction upon hearing this, telling her to let him know if she needed anything else. Sharon thanked her grandfather and bowed respectfully. She then declared that they could begin. Hearing this, the chairman's expression immediately turned stone-cold serious. As his granddaughter was referring to an S-rank dungeon raid, the scene then returned to our protagonist, who was found sprawled on the ground in utter exhaustion. He couldn't keep up with even a fraction of Hercules' movements. Siwoo clearly understood that he still had a long, long way to go in mastering divine martial arts. He picked up his phone and stared at his statistics with bitter disappointment. The most discouraging part was that his level wouldn't increase. He wondered if it ever would. A dignitary once asked Confucius whether there was a way to avoid losing a battle that could never be won. Confucius had replied that there was, and the answer was to never end the fight. Hercules himself had once been a man a hero who surpassed a god, even in human form. Surely, Hercules must have struggled, fought, and felt disappointment along the way. Divine martial arts were not simply a method of combat, but a force so overwhelming it made one question: if a human could ever truly achieve it. Siwoo realized he wasn't talented at all, which meant the only thing he could rely on was endless effort. Taking a fighting stance, he began punching forward, repeating Hercules' movements over and over. Each strike generated a powerful gust of wind. An unyielding will filled his body. The gentleman's attributes of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom increased by 0.5%. When Siwoo opened his eyes, he was stunned by what he saw. With his final strike, he had successfully mastered Hercules' divine martial art, utterly trashing the surrounding park in the process. He let out an awkward chuckle, realizing he'd now have to find himself a private training facility elsewhere. Diogo sighed, receiving yet another message from her boss. Based on the description, it looked like another video involving vampire bats, just like the previous one, The Fire, which had reclaimed first place on her channel with a record-breaking time of 11 seconds. It was an astonishing feat, her attack ending almost as soon as it began. Despite that, Siwoo had uploaded a video with the same concept. Yet again, the file finished downloading, and Dayako opened it. This time, Siwoo appeared, dressed in a witch costume, greeting the channel's viewers. He reminded them once more that he was the man who conquered everything in the world, the conqueror of the world. Looking directly at the smartphone screen, he mentioned he'd heard a new record had recently been set on the Fire Witch's channel, 11 seconds. A truly incredible achievement. Because of that, he stated he would once again attempt to defeat Fire Witch Yu Hong Han's record and demonstrate how it was done. As Daiaku continued watching, she found herself increasingly shocked by what unfolded. Siwoo had clearly returned to his usual reckless style. He explained that viewers might be wondering why he had suddenly set his sights on Miss Yuhan. If he openly targeted her, he would likely be roasted online. That meant he could not act without preparation. That was why he intended to reveal his strategy. How to defeat Miss Yuhan, the current record holder. With that, he announced that it was time to stop the pointless talk and finally begin. Siwoo sharply lifted his leg and slammed it into the ground with all his strength. Immediately afterward, the camera lens cracked and the video abruptly cut off. Diogo was stunned by how suddenly everything ended. Deciding to double-check, she noticed that her boss had sent her 2 videos. When she opened the second file, she was absolutely stunned all over again. The very instant Siwoo's foot met the ground, the gate behind him warped and twisted violently. The camera then dropped, revealing massive cracks spreading across the ground from the point of impact. This ultimately led to the dungeon's complete destruction. Dayako was left absolutely speechless, utterly unable to comprehend the sight before her. Her body trembled as she rechecked the video's duration once more, only to discover it was a mere 4 seconds long. Just a short while later, Siwoo's new video had already soared past 350k views, and his subscriber count had skyrocketed to a staggering 11,000. Thanks to divine martial arts, both views and comments were absolutely skyrocketing at this pace, earning him hundreds of millions. No longer seemed like an impossible dream. While scrolling through the comments beneath the video, something utterly unexpected caught his eye. One user boldly claimed that this level of power should be more than enough to attack the dungeon, where Han Sharon had famously failed. Siwoo was completely taken aback by this claim. Quickly opening the comment thread, he saw countless users expressing their surprise and hotly discussing the topic. At first, he assumed it was just a baseless rumor. Then, another user stated they had personally verified the information and that multiple articles were already circulating widely online. Siwoo was startled. If articles truly existed, then what would become of the SH group after failing an S-rank dungeon raid? At around 1 in the afternoon, news had broken that the chairwoman of the SH Hunters Guild, Han Sharon, had failed an S-rank dungeon raid. Fortunately, there were no reported casualties, But many people expressed widespread disappointment. The SH Group, in particular, was in a truly grim state as they had recently invested heavily in the hunting industry. With grand dreams of entering the broader market, that ambition was now effectively crushed. As a result, their stock prices plummeted dramatically. Siwoo desperately searched for more details, but none of the reports explained exactly how Han Sharon had truly failed. After reading through everything, he wondered how this situation was related to him at all. He tossed his phone onto the bed, deciding he had no time to worry about her situation. Han Sharon could handle her own problems. He was far too busy with his own. On the top floor of SH Group headquarters, Han Sharon arrived and was immediately informed that someone had come to visit. Sharon greeted the SH Group's director, Han Mina. The director remarked, it had been ages since they last saw each other. Then, with a gentle smile, asked how Sharon had been. She asked Sharon to look at her, then wondered whether if she was just returning from a meeting with the chairman. Sharon confirmed she had indeed met with him, and then asked her aunt if she had gone to see him too. Mina explained that the chairman had called an executive meeting. At that moment, SH Group was in complete turmoil. Not only had their stock prices plummeted, but investors were rapidly withdrawing their funds. Mina emphasized, this situation wasn't solely Sharon's fault. In truth, the executives themselves were to blame for placing excessive expectations on her. As Mina prepared to leave, she told Sharon she could go as well, otherwise she'd have to face her brothers. After Mina departed, Sharon was left standing alone in the hallway, lost deep in thought. Sometime later, Xiao drank Siwoo's newly prepared decoction and nearly vomited from its taste. Siwoo gave an awkward smile and suggested that the bitterness was normal. Despite that, she was pleased to see his S+ rank. Divine Medical Arts continued to improve, already reaching 20.47%. This time the decoction was noticeably more palatable than before. After studying the gentleman's mind, all of Shu's attributes began to improve at a faster rate. Not only divine martial arts, but also super strength, insight, and even divine metallurgy became easier to develop. Among them, insight showed the greatest growth, reaching 24.8%, an 8% increase. This was due to its connection with all his other traits. Reflecting on this, Shu realized that the gentleman's mind didn't possess an. After SOA finished, he inexplicably shot to SSS rank. As she drank the potent decoction, Siwoo immediately noticed her complexion was already beginning to improve. This proved his treatment was genuinely effective, filling him with immense happiness. If he kept refining his divine medical arts, he was confident he could eventually cure So's illness. The only lingering problem? Money. A minimum subscription fee of 1.1 billion won was a massive burden. With only 1.7 billion won remaining in his account, was nowhere near enough to cover the monthly fees for Huadawa and Confucius. Siwa looked at his improved decoction and briefly fantasized about how great it would be if he could sell it. But here's the catch. Medical preparations couldn't be sold freely without proper medical certification. He decided to ask Kim Seon about this matter later. Suddenly, a knock echoed at the door. Expecting no visitors, Siwa wondered who it could be. The person outside apologized for the interruption, asking if this was Mr. Mong Siwoo's residence. The visitor then introduced himself as Kong Min Jae, the personal secretary of Miss Han Sharon. After welcoming him inside, Siwoo listened as Kong Min Jae explained that the young lady wanted to challenge the S-rank dungeon once again. Hearing Sharon intended to return to the dungeon, Siwoo immediately assumed she required his assistance. He wanted to confirm if she needed him to devise a strategy for the raid. The secretary confirmed this. Siwoo then inquired what had happened during the first attempt to clear the dungeon. Kong Min Jae apologized, admitting he didn't know the details himself. His only instruction had been that Mong Siwoo's help was absolutely necessary. He also mentioned that the young lady had originally wanted to come in person, but because so many eyes were on her, she was unable to do so. He bowed apologetically and asked if Siwoo would be willing to speak with her right then. Siwoo could already sense it. The sweet scent of money filled his mind, thinking a joint raid between the conqueror of the world and Han Sharon in an S-rank dungeon would undeniably rack up millions of YouTube views later. Inside the SH Group's HQ gym, Siwoo arrived, and right away, he spotted Han Sharon training with a sword. She wore the gloves he'd personally crafted, completely engrossed in her training. Sharon completely failed to notice anyone enter and kept swinging her sword fiercely. The secretary told Siwoo he'd call her over, but Siwoo stopped him, proposing they wait. Siwoo recognized Han Sharon had fallen into a trance-like state during her training. Such profound concentration in training was incredibly beneficial, something he could confidently attest to after having just experienced it himself. The secretary tried to argue, but Siwoo explained that while waiting might take a moment, this was a golden opportunity for Sharon. She continued her rigorous training, completely oblivious to her surroundings. While watching, Siwoo noticed her movements lacked any true system. He theorized that this understanding stemmed from his improved comprehension gained through S+ insight and divine martial arts. To him, Sharon's sword swing seemed like mere random arm movements. He'd also heard she'd never formally learned proper sword techniques. A key trait of Han Sharon's was her S-rank sword talent, yet her immense talent was marred by excessive roughness. It was akin to someone possessing SS rank superpowers without having learned divine martial arts to properly harness them. If Sharon could just master proper martial arts, her potential for growth would be immense. The true path for her ultimate development would be to join a sect as a disciple. However, there was no realistic way that could ever happen. The SH Group would never permit it. If Han Sharon became a sect disciple, she'd no longer belong to the SH Group. Sometimes, a powerful background wasn't always beneficial. And observing Sharon's current skill level, Siwoo wondered if she could even maintain martial arts, even if she learned them from GodTube. Several channels immediately sprang to mind. King Arthur, the legendary knight of the Round Table, featured in the Excalibur video Siegfried, the first dragon slayer, now offering advice on how to kill dragons. Xiongyu, the invader who led tens of thousands of men and forced Liu Bang to sing the song of the Han Dynasty in one video. Their content was undeniably extreme, but Xiyu could not help thinking about what would happen if Han Sharon learned their martial arts. The problem was that Sharon could not access GodTube, meaning she would never learn swordsmanship that way at that moment. An idea struck Siwoo. He could watch the videos himself and then teach Sharon directly. Although it would require expensive subscription fees, he could simply charge her for it, whether it was 1 billion or 10 billion. Made little difference to the granddaughter of the SH Group. Just thinking about the money made Siu start drooling. This was undeniably a golden deal backed by Sharon's overwhelming financial power. There was only one problem: would Han Sharon, an S-rank hunter, truly accept lessons from MAD rank hunter? On top of that, he could only teach her techniques he had already learned himself. That led Siwoo to confront a serious question. Was it even possible to teach divine martial arts to someone after learning them personally? Still, if he gave up now, everything would be meaningless. Meanwhile, Sharon finished her training and approached the secretary, remarking that she should have been warned that Mong Siwoo had arrived. The secretary apologized and explained that he had not interrupted her because Mr. Siwoo specifically requested not to disturb her training. Sharon appeared slightly surprised by this. Siwoo stared at Sharon and suddenly blushed, leaving him unable to speak. Sharon, also blushing, stated that she would go wash up first before leaving. Watching her go, Siwoo had to admit to himself that Han Sharon was extremely beautiful. Later, in a calmer setting, Sharon apologized for making Siwoo wait for so long. Siwoo explained that it had not been that long and mentioned that he had heard she needed his help. He then asked what exactly had gone down during her dungeon raid. Sharon leaned in a bit, revealing there were no monsters whatsoever inside the dungeon. This revelation utterly shocked Siwoo. Sharon then clarified that while no monsters were there initially, they did encounter one eventually. Based on her explanation, Siwoo concluded there had, indeed, been a single monster, recalling its predatory gaze. Sharon explained that, while the creature resembled a wolf, it was difficult to even call a monster. She had never seen anything like it before. Saiwu reflected on this. Wolf-type monsters were highly diverse, but as far as he knew, wolf monsters had never appeared in S-rank dungeons. As she continued speaking, Sharon began to tremble. She admitted she had been completely powerless against it, considering it was an S-rank dungeon, and she possessed A+ level strength. She shouldn't have been saying something like that. Saiwu asked if she truly couldn't handle it, and she immediately confirmed it. Saiwu remembered that Sharon hadn't entered the dungeon alone. She'd been accompanied by elite team members, all equipped with powerful gear. Yet, even then, they had failed. Worse still, this wasn't just a simple failure. It was something entirely beyond their capacity. Saiwu summarized the situation. Internally, there had been only one monster in the dungeon, and that monster was so powerful that even Han Sharon couldn't fight it. Dungeon rank was determined by the total mana contained within it, which was why dungeons were almost never classified based on a single monster. However, in extremely rare cases, a dungeon could revolve around a single entity. This phenomenon was known as a mutation, or more precisely, a capo monster. A capo monster was a creature that possessed all the mana within a dungeon. If Sharon's team had encountered such a being, her failure made perfect sense. A capo monster was already terrifying on its own, and the worst part was that it was S-rank. Saiwu explained. He believed they had just faced a capo monster. Sharon was taken aback, confessing this was the first time she'd ever heard of such a thing. Saiwu urged her to abandon the dungeon completely, saying it was the wiser choice, and questioned if she truly needed to challenge it again. After all, dying over it wouldn't be worth it. However, Sharon insisted she had to succeed. Saiwu asked her why it mattered so much. She explained she wasn't the only one affected. Saiwu immediately understood because of Sharon's failed raid. The SH group had suffered massive losses. He'd already heard that hundreds of billions of won vanished within minutes of the first articles being published. To prevent further collapse in stock prices, Sharon needed to resolve the situation. She had to succeed in the dungeon raid as quickly as possible. It was undeniably dangerous, but trillions of won were worth risking. Her life for the S-class boss monster, a completely unknown entity. It would be extremely difficult to defeat. Saiwu declared that he understood everything. However, he had one condition. He extended his hand with a smile and requested permission to shoot a video for his YouTube channel. Sharon was taken aback by the request. Saiwu then demanded an additional 10 billion won. With a businesslike smile, he made it clear he wouldn't go any lower. A short time later, Saiwu received an advance payment of 1 billion won. Looking at the deposit, he considered himself lucky, and even thought he should have asked for more. Still, the fact that she agreed so easily surprised him. He decided to drop the thought and reminded himself not to be too greedy, since 10 billion was already an enormous sum. Now, his focus shifted to the true problem, the S-class capo monster that no one had ever seen before. Saiwu wasn't even certain whether he could devise a proper strategy. Asking for too much would only increase the burden. However, his insight had already reached 24%. That meant analysis was possible. Saiwu told himself that no matter what, he could do it.